Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the velvet-draped chambers and gold-etched scrolls of a history most people only whisper about. You're about to meet rulers who weren't just making decisions of state, they were also making very questionable choices behind closed doors. Welcome to the forbidden affairs that rattled entire empires. And spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this if you're a romantic idealist. These stories are messy, power-hungry, dangerous, and oh yeah, completely unforgettable. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your city and what time it is right now where you're listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It's 48 BC. You're floating down the Nile, night air heavy with the scent of blue lotus, and torchlight flickers across the water like 1,000 golden eyes. Alexandria hums in the distance, a city pulsing with poetry and politics. But you're tucked beneath a woven mat, silent cargo in a carpet being dragged into the palace of one of the most powerful men in the world, Julius Caesar. And rolled up beside you, Cleopatra VII, Queen of the Nile, political strategist, living goddess, and frankly, a walking headache for everyone in Rome. She's 21, ruthless, and smarter than any of her siblings, which is saying something since most of them are either dead or trying to kill her. Caesar, on the other hand, is 52, battle-scarred, and already has his hands full with a crumbling republic and way too many enemies. This question mark. This was never supposed to happen, but Cleopatra knows exactly what she's doing. Her reign is shaky. Her brother-husband, yes, that was a thing, has the army and the backing of certain Roman officials. Her only move is boldness, so she smuggles herself directly into Caesar's quarters, not with an army, but with her wit, her voice, and that signature eyeliner. It works. Caesar is captivated. Whether it's the audacity, the perfume, or the politics, he decides to back her claim to the throne. And just like that, Egypt becomes Rome's new obsession. Well, Caesar's obsession at least. Over the next year, they become inseparable. You'd think Caesar would be busy with the civil war raging back home, but nope, he's leisurely cruising the Nile with Cleopatra, holding extravagant feasts and building temples in her honour. Rome is whispering. Senators are raising eyebrows. Caesar is already married after all, and Cleopatra isn't exactly the docile foreign queen type. She's demanding, multilingual and politically active, which is both intoxicating and deeply inconvenient. Then comes the real kicker. She gives birth to a son, Caesarion, and though Caesar never officially declares the boy his heir, he doesn't exactly deny it either. This enrages the Senate back in Rome. It's one thing to have a mistress, it's another to have a child with a foreign queen and parade them around like royalty. Caesar eventually returns to Rome, bringing Cleopatra and the baby in tow. Imagine the optics. The Queen of Egypt living in Caesar's villa dressed like a goddess, speaking Greek and sipping wine while Rome simmers with republican anxiety. It's like throwing olive oil on a fire, and in fact, it leads directly to the knives in the Senate. March 15th, 44 BC, Julius Caesar is assassinated, stabbed 23 times by men who used to call him friend. Cleopatra, realizing just how cold Rome can be when love turns into politics, flees back to Egypt with her son. Here's your historical fact. Cleopatra was not Egyptian. She was Macedonian Greek, a descendant of Ptolemy, one of Alexander the Great's generals. She just leaned hard into Egyptian culture to win her people's favour. Smart, right? Now, your quirky fringe detail. Some accounts suggest Cleopatra may have been the first woman in recorded history to create her own line of cosmetics, possibly using a mix of crushed beetles and seaweed. And yes, her eyeliner game was lethal. And then there's the debate that still makes scholars frown into their papyrus. Was Cleopatra truly in love with Caesar, or was it all calculated? A power play from start to finish. Some argue she seduced him purely for survival. Others claim it was a genuine connection of two brilliant minds. Truth is, both might be true. Passion and politics don't always ride in separate chariots, so as the curtain falls on Caesar's life, and Cleopatra returns to the shifting sands of Alexandria, remember, this affair didn't just change their lives, it redrew the map of empires, birthed a legacy of fear in Rome, and set the stage for even juicier drama to come. And trust me, we're just getting started. You're standing once again at the edge of the Nile, but everything feels heavier. Rome is mourning, and Cleopatra is alone. Well, not quite. Caesarion, her son, is growing fast, and his mother has not forgotten the power of alliances. She has something else up her jewelled sleeve. Another Roman general with ambition in his veins, and a weakness for strong, dangerous women. Enter Mark Antony, the kind of man who walks into a room like he already owns it, drinks enough wine to flood a vineyard, and then somehow commands the loyalty of legions. The year is 41 BC, and Cleopatra invites Antony to Tarsus, a port city buzzing with gossip. She doesn't just send a messenger. Oh no! She sails up the river like a scene straight out of a fever dream. Her barge is gilded in gold, sails dyed purple, and she lounges under a canopy dressed as the goddess Isis. Perfume drifts through the air. Musicians play. Every citizen who catches sight of her instantly believes this is not just a queen, but a divine being. You can imagine Mark Antony watching her approach, jaw probably somewhere near his, sandals. What follows is a partnership that redefines the word intense. They drink, they dance, they plot, and very quickly they fall into something that resembles love, or at least mutual obsession. For Cleopatra, Antony is her way back into Rome's game. For Antony, Cleopatra is a lavish, living escape from the cold austerity of Roman politics. But neither of them seems to realise, or maybe they don't care, that this isn't just romance, it's dynamite. Within a few years, Cleopatra bears Antony twins, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene. Soon after, a third child, Ptolemy Philadelphus. He doesn't marry her officially, but publicly acknowledges the children, and in a series of lavish ceremonies, distributes parts of the Roman East to his new royal family. This, in case you're wondering, is not how you win friends in Rome. Back home, Octavian, Caesar's grandnephew and adopted son, is fuming. He sees Antony's behaviour as betrayal. Worse, he frames it as treasonous. "Look," he tells the Senate, "our Roman hero is playing dress-up with a foreign queen, giving away Roman land and raising kids who aren't even full citizens. It's not just propaganda, it's war bait, and war comes." In 31 BC, at the Battle of Actium, Antony and Cleopatra face off against Octavian's forces. It's sea versus sea, gods versus gods. You'd think they'd have the edge. Antony has experience, Cleopatra has ships, and they're fighting for everything. But halfway through the battle, Cleopatra panics. She sails away. Antony, either in love or in a fog of bad decisions, follows her, abandoning his fleet. That move cost them everything. They flee to Alexandria. The city that once shimmered like a beacon now becomes a tomb. Octavian marches in with cold, calculated victory. Cleopatra, always the strategist, attempts one last seduction, but Octavian is no Antony. He sees her as a threat, not a lover. Antony, believing Cleopatra is already dead, falls on his sword. He doesn't die right away, though. Bleeding out, he's carried to Cleopatra's mausoleum, where she holds him as he dies. It's Shakespearean, because yes, this is the story that inspired Antony and Cleopatra. Cleopatra doesn't wait long to follow him. According to legend, she uses an asp, a venomous snake, to end her life. But here comes your quirky fact. Modern scholars debate whether she really used a snake at all. There's some evidence to suggest she may have used a toxic ointment instead. Either way, her death is iconic, draped in royal robes lying beside a dead empire. And here's your historical fact. Cleopatra spoke at least 9 languages fluently, and was the first Ptolemaic ruler to actually speak Egyptian. She wasn't just a pretty face. She was politically brilliant, and often underestimated because of her gender. As for our scholarly debate tonight, was Cleopatra the victim of Roman propaganda, or a reckless manipulator of men? Roman historians painted her as a seductress, a sorceress, even a madwoman. But many modern historians argue she was simply a ruler doing what male rulers had always done, aligning herself with power, building alliances, and using every weapon in her arsenal to protect her country. When Octavian finally takes Alexandria, he doesn't destroy it. Instead, he takes Cleopatra's children back to Rome, parading them in his victory march like exotic pets from a conquered world. Caesarion, her eldest son with Julius Caesar, is quietly executed. Octavian can't afford a rival with divine blood, and so it ends, not with a coronation, but with a pair of intertwined bodies, a ruined fleet, and a city caught between two empires. Cleopatra and Antony, madly in love, completely doomed, left behind more than children and broken alliances. They left behind a legend, one whispered through silk curtains and written in ink that never really fades. Their story is messy, tragic, and breathtakingly human. Two people who reached for godhood and burned everything in the process. You're barefoot on sun-warmed stone, eyes drawn to the silhouette of a man standing alone on his palace rooftop. He isn't a warrior like Caesar or a lover king like Antony. He's King David of Israel, poet, musician, shepherd turned monarch. His city, Jerusalem, is quiet beneath him, and yet this night will echo louder than any of his battles, not because of swords or crowns, but because of desire. This is one of those stories that starts small, a glance, a woman bathing in the moonlight, and the unmistakable tension of someone watching who shouldn't be. Her name is Bathsheba. She's married. Her husband Uriah is off at war, and David, who has more power than perhaps any man in the region, sends for her anyway. Now here's where it gets murky. The ancient texts don't give us her side. Was it seduction? Coercion? A quiet submission in a world where kings always got what they wanted? We'll never know. What we do know is that she becomes pregnant, and that this creates a colossal, burning problem. David could have confessed, could have taken the moral high ground, or at least responsibility. But no. The man who once danced before God with abandon and wrote psalms of praise goes into full cover-up mode. First, he recalls Uriah from the battlefield, hoping the man will sleep with his wife and never suspect the truth. But Uriah is too loyal, too principled. He refuses to enjoy comforts while his men sleep in tents. So David, the shepherd boy king with a heart after God's own, arranges Uriah's death. He sends him back to battle with sealed orders that place him in the front line, guaranteeing he'll be struck down. And he is. Bathsheba mourns. David marries her. From the outside it looks tidy, royal, even noble. But behind the curtains, everyone close enough to the throne knows something is wrong. Then the prophet Nathan shows up, and Nathan doesn't mince words. He tells David a story about a rich man who steals a poor man's only lamb, and David, righteous as ever, declares, "That man deserves to die." Nathan turns slowly, eyes hard. "You are the man." That moment freezes the palace. David breaks. It's not political fallout that gets him. It's spiritual shame. He writes Psalm 51, one of the most raw confessions of guilt in ancient scripture. "Create in me a clean heart, O God." But even repentance doesn't erase consequences. The child born of the affair dies in infancy. David is never quite the same, neither is his family. Here's your historical fact. King David's reign, around 1000 BCE, marked the height of a united Israelite kingdom, politically strong, artistically rich, and militarily secure. His influence shaped not just religious texts, but centuries of Middle Eastern politics. Now, let's pivot to the quirky. Some scholars believe David played a stringed instrument known as the kinnor, a type of lyre. Think of it like an ancient harp with soft tones that would have carried over the wind. Legend says David's music could calm wild animals and even quiet the spiritual torment of King Saul. And here's your scholarly debate for tonight. Was Bathsheba complicit in the affair or a victim of royal abuse? Traditional readings often paint her as seductive, but many modern interpretations push back, pointing out that in a patriarchal monarchy, her consent might not have been possible. After all, can you say no to a king without losing your life? Regardless, Bathsheba doesn't fade into obscurity. She becomes a queen. Later, she secures the throne for her son Solomon, who would go on to become one of the most legendary rulers in ancient history. Talk about a long game. So here you are, still on that rooftop. The moon hasn't moved much, but everything below has shifted. David's affair didn't shake an empire in the way Roman swords might, but it cracked the foundation of a dynasty. His family erupts with betrayal, rebellion, even incest and fratricide in the years that follow. One of his sons stages a full revolt, another rapes his half-sister. The line of David becomes a case study in generational trauma, playing out like a slow-motion implosion. And yet, it's from this mess that Solomon is born. The builder of the temple, the man who would ask God for wisdom and be granted more than any before him. So, strange as it sounds, something holy emerges from the most forbidden of beginnings. a king whose worst moment gave birth to a legacy that would shape 3 of the world's major religions. It's hard not to feel a bit unsettled by that. These stories don't wrap up cleanly. They don't deliver justice in convenient doses. But that's why they endure. Because they feel real. Because you too have stood on rooftops and watched something beautiful and dangerous flicker in the dark. Tonight, David isn't just a statue in a museum or a name in a dusty book. He's the man pacing under the stars, crown heavy on his head, heart twisted with longing and guilt. And if he could speak, he might whisper the same thing we've all whispered at some point in our lives. I should have walked away. You're now thousands of miles and nearly 1,000 years away from David's rooftop, and yet the tension is hauntingly familiar. The scent in the air is sandalwood and lacquered wood floors, mingling with the faint trace of cherry blossoms drifting in through a carved window lattice. This is Tang Dynasty China, around the 7th century, and you're inside the Forbidden City before it was even called that. Everything here gleams, except the intentions. You're not here to meet a king tonight. You're here for Wu Zetian, the only woman in all of Chinese history to rule as emperor in her own right. Not empress, not consort, emperor. But before she reaches that title, she starts in a place far less grand, as a low-ranking concubine in the palace of Emperor Taizong. She's just 14 when she enters the court, another face among hundreds in a gilded cage designed to be both beautiful and cruel. But Wu is different. She watches, she listens, and more importantly, she waits. When Taizong dies, his concubines are supposed to live out their days in a convent, sewing silks and whispering memories. Wu refuses. Somehow, impossibly, she returns to the palace, this time into the service of Taizong's son, Emperor Gaozong, and yes, that's exactly as scandalous as it sounds. The whispers start instantly. She was his father's concubine. It's practically incest by Confucian standards. But Gaozong doesn't care. He's utterly smitten. She rises in the ranks faster than anyone expects, displacing other wives and concubines with a smile sharp as a blade. The Empress herself, Wang, can't stop Wu's ascent. One of the more vicious tales claims that Wu killed her own infant daughter, just to frame Wang and eliminate her. Scholars still debate the truth of that, but here's the brutal outcome. Wu becomes Empress. Now she's no longer climbing the ladder. She's holding the whole palace in her hands. Gaozong suffers a stroke and Wu effectively takes control of the empire, issuing orders, managing ministers, even reshaping official titles. She doesn't sit behind a veil. She sits on the throne, and when her husband dies, she doesn't step aside. She declares herself emperor and creates the Zhou dynasty, interrupting the long line of Tang rulers. For a woman to do this in deeply patriarchal imperial China is like lighting a fire in the middle of a temple. Everyone sees it, and they burn. But let's get to the juicy part, her lovers. Once she's emperor, she doesn't stop at power. She installs 2 handsome brothers, the Zhang siblings, as her personal attendants. And by attendants, we mean very obvious boyfriends. They are much younger, strikingly beautiful, and loyal only to her. Some say she paraded them around the court like peacocks in silk. Others whisper she used them to spy on ministers and eliminate threats. One rumour insists she had a special tunnel constructed from her bedroom to theirs, so no one would see her sneaking off. Subtlety was not her brand. Court records call them favourites, but everyone knew what was going on. The public seethed. The Confucian elite choked on their tea. A female emperor was bad enough, but a female emperor taking young lovers while running the country? That was the apocalypse. And yet, Wu ruled well. Infrastructure projects flourished. Buddhism gained patronage. Agriculture was stable. She promoted talented people, including other women. The empire didn't just survive her reign. It arguably thrived. The men she loved came and went. Some were executed when they got too ambitious. Some disappeared quietly. One was reportedly beaten to death by officials after she died. Love in Wu's court was like jasmine, sweet, fleeting, and potentially poisonous. Your historical fact for tonight: Wu Zetian ruled China from 690 to 705 AD, and though her name was blackened for centuries, modern historians have re-evaluated her as one of the most capable rulers of her age. Her reign was both feared and admired. Your fringe fact: one of Wu's edicts involved creating new Chinese characters to reflect her ideology, including a new character for Zhao, meaning light. The character was so complex and rare, Scribes complained for decades. It later fell out of use, but for a while it was mandatory in official documents. And now the scholarly debate. Was Zetian a visionary ruler who used unconventional methods to maintain power in a misogynistic world? Or was she a ruthless tyrant who destroyed rivals and manipulated lovers for control? Honestly, the answer might be yes to both. She murdered, lied, seduced, and outmaneuvered nearly every man in her path. But she also broke the glass ceiling so hard it cracked through the dynastic heavens. So as you sit in her shadow, watching silk robes brush against jade floors, you realise something. This wasn't just an affair or a scandal or even a rebellion. This was a woman reshaping her world through love, through manipulation, through absolute refusal to be forgotten. You're standing in the candlelit hallway of a Tudor palace now, and the air is thick with incense anxiety and the rustle of velvet skirts. Through the carved wooden doors ahead, you can hear the murmur of a court in motion, whispers, courtiers shifting uncomfortably, someone laughing a little too loud to mask fear. Because everyone knows the truth. When King Henry VIII falls in love, someone usually ends up dead. Tonight, you're about to meet Anne Boleyn, the woman who didn't just steal a king's heart, she rearranged the entire English church to do it. Let's rewind to the 1520s. Henry's already been married to Catherine of Aragon for years. She's dignified, Spanish royalty, and politically valuable. The only problem? No surviving sons. Just one daughter, Mary. Henry sees this as not just a personal failure but a dynastic threat, and in walks Anne, sharp-tongued, stylish, educated in the French court, and absolutely uninterested in being anyone's mistress. That, of course, makes her magnetic. Henry begins writing her letters, dozens of them, brimming with yearning, obsession, even desperation. He calls her his mistress and friend. He sends her gifts. She sends them back. For years. She plays the long game, always just out of reach, and Henry, for all his power, becomes a man possessed. Here's where it gets empire-shaking. Henry can't just marry Anne. He's still married to Catherine, and the Pope won't grant a divorce. So Henry makes a stunning choice. He breaks from the Catholic Church altogether, establishes the Church of England, names himself its supreme head. All of this, doctrinal upheaval, religious schism, national chaos, because he wants Anne Boleyn. Finally, in 1533, they marry in secret. Anne is crowned queen, visibly pregnant with what Henry hopes will be a son. But fate, as it often does, has a cruel smirk. The child is a girl, Elizabeth. And you already know how that story turns out, but we'll get there later. Anne never produces a male heir, and Henry, a man who trades affections like chess pieces, begins to sour. Her sharp wit that once dazzled him now irritates. Her political opinions, once admired, are called meddling. The court turns against her with stunning speed. The rumours start to swirl like smoke from a wet fire. Accusations of adultery. 5 men, including her own brother George, even whispers of witchcraft. Historians still argue whether any of it was true, but let's be real. This wasn't about truth. It was about convenience. Henry needed Anne gone, and in the twisted theatre of Tudor politics that meant death. She's arrested, tried, and found guilty. The evidence is thin, laughable even, but the verdict is a foregone conclusion. Henry, in a final theatrical gesture, arranges for a French swordsman to perform the execution, more elegant than the English axe, supposedly. Anne faces it with eerie calm. On May 19th, 1536, she steps up to the scaffold, gives a final speech praising the king, because she knows he's watching, and kneels. One clean stroke. Her head is gone. The king is remarried within days. Your historical fact. Anne Boleyn was the mother of Elizabeth I, who would go on to become one of the greatest monarchs in British history. So even in death, Anne shaped the world. And here's your fringe fact for the evening. Anne had 6 fingers. Or did she? Some accounts say she had an extra nail or finger on one hand, a witch's mark. Others think it was a smear campaign by her enemies to dehumanise her. There's no hard evidence either way, but the rumour stuck because of course it did. Now for your scholarly debate. Did Anne genuinely love Henry, or was she simply playing the most dangerous political game in Europe? Some argue she was a Protestant reformer at heart, deeply invested in reshaping the church. Others suggest she was more ambitious than ideological, aiming not for love, but for power. Then again, maybe it started with romance and spiraled into something far bigger, something neither of them could control. What's clear is this: Anne didn't just change Henry, she changed England. Her marriage set off the English Reformation. Her daughter, Elizabeth, would inherit a fractured kingdom and turn it into a global empire. And yet, her name still drips with scandal centuries later. As you walk back down that candlelit hallway, you realise something dark and dazzling. Anne Boleyn wasn't the first woman to be punished for saying no or for wanting more, but she might be one of the most famous. Her affair wasn't a fling, it was a revolution, and she paid for it with her life. You find yourself now beneath the glittering chandeliers of Versailles, where everything sparkles, even the shadows. The smell of roses and powder fills the air, but beneath it all there's a mustiness. Secrets. Perfume can only cover so much, and if you listen closely you can almost hear the hush of silk skirts sweeping past marble, the clinking of crystal goblets, and the murmured name that once made even kings tremble: Madame de Montespan. We're in 17th century France, and Louis XIV, the Sun King himself, rules not just the land, but the entire cultural imagination of Europe. He's tall, arrogant, wears heels higher than yours, and builds a palace so extravagant it becomes a symbol of divine monarchy. But in the middle of all that golden glory, his heart is caught in something far messier, a dangerous, dazzling affair with a woman who refuses to simply be a mistress. Françoise Athénée de Rochechouart de Mortemar, say that 3 times fast, is no common courtesan. She's a noble woman, whip-smart and absolutely fearless. When she catches the king's eye, she doesn't just flutter her lashes, she walks into court like she owns the place, and before long she sort of does. For over a decade she's the true power behind the throne. Not officially, but in all the ways that matter. She bears him 7 children, many of whom he legitimizes. She lives in rooms attached to his own. Ministers consult her before they consult him. She is the queen in everything but name, and oh, how that rankles the actual queen. But here's where things get wild. By the 1670s, the affair of the poisons rocks Versailles like a thunderclap. Suddenly, members of the French nobility are being accused of black masses, baby sacrifices and poison plots. It's less a scandal and more a gothic horror show. Fortune-tellers and witches are arrested. One of them, Catherine Montvoisin, known as La Voisin, claims that Madame de Montespan herself attended black magic rituals. Even worse, that she used them to seduce the king. Yes, the king's mistress, accused of conjuring dark spirits to maintain her place in bed and in power. Let's pause there. Because wow! Now, did Madame actually do any of this? That's still debated. Some say it was all lies, cooked up by rivals. Others insist where there's that much smoke, especially acrid, sulphur-scented smoke, there's bound to be fire. No charges were ever brought against her officially, but she was quietly moved out of favour. The king, once obsessed, begins pulling away, both emotionally and physically. And Montespan? She slowly fades from court, eventually retiring to a convent, where she lives out her days in repentance and prayer. Whether for sins of the flesh or sins of alchemy, we'll never really know. Here's your historical fact. The affair of the poisons was a real and sprawling investigation, launched in 1677. It implicated over 30 people, including aristocrats, and led to multiple executions. It genuinely terrified Louis XIV and changed the tone of his court permanently. Tonight's quirky little detail: Madame de Montespan's hair was famously thick and wavy, a trait that even influenced court fashion. Women actually commissioned wigs known as Montespans to imitate her look. Imagine someone being so seductive, their hair becomes a trend. That's not influence. That's sorcery in itself. And your scholarly debate. Was Madame de Montespan truly involved in witchcraft? Or was she a scapegoat for a court that hated a woman having that much sway? Some historians suggest the entire scandal was weaponized to dismantle her power and cleanse the court's image. Others argue that in a time when magic and politics intertwined, it's not unthinkable she might have sought extra help to keep the most powerful man in Europe wrapped around her jewelled finger. Regardless, her fall was swift. One day, she's dining with kings. The next, she's eating alone in a quiet religious cell, her body bent over prayer, her mind still echoing with music from Versailles. And you, you're left wondering, was she a monster or just another woman punished for climbing too close to the sun? Because here's the thing, Versailles wasn't just mirrors and banquets. It was a battlefield, and Montespan fought harder than most. She used every weapon, beauty, wit, motherhood, maybe even blood rights, until she was no longer needed. Then, like so many royal mistresses before her, she was removed without fanfare. Still, walk through the halls of Versailles today, and you can almost feel her presence. A whisper behind the gilded wallpaper, a perfume that refuses to fade. The air around you is colder now, heavy with fur-lined cloaks and snow-dusted stone. You're in Imperial Russia, surrounded by frost and candlelight, the kind that flickers more from tension than from wind. The palace is vast, echoing with secrets and footsteps that hesitate just before turning corners, and standing at the very heart of it all with a sly smile and a dagger-sharp mind is Catherine the Great. No tiara-wearing pushover. This is a woman who didn't just wear the crown, she wrestled it from her husband's cold hands and rewrote the story of an empire. But even she wasn't immune to temptation. And for Catherine, temptation had a name. Grigory Potemkin. Let's back up though, because Catherine doesn't start at the top. Born Sophie of Anhalt-Zerbst, she's a minor German princess who marries into the Russian royal family at just 16. Her husband, Peter III, is, how do we put this delicately, an absolute weirdo. He worships Frederick the Great, plays with toy soldiers in bed, and makes zero effort to hide his disdain for Russia. Catherine endures him, barely, while secretly learning Russian, studying philosophy, and aligning herself with powerful allies. When the moment's right, she stages a coup. Peter is arrested and conveniently dies soon after. It's never officially pinned on her, but let's be honest, nobody's crying into their vodka over it. Now, firmly on the throne, Catherine rules with intelligence, flair, and the kind of political savvy that makes most men look like distracted toddlers. She modernizes Russia, expands its territory, sponsors the arts, and corresponds with Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire. But she's also lonely. She craves companionship, both intellectual and, let's just say, otherwise. Enter Grigory Potemkin. He's not her first lover, not by a long shot, but he's different. A military genius, fiercely loyal, and charming in the way that dangerous people often are. The moment they meet, sparks fly. Potemkin quickly rises through the ranks, becoming both Catherine's advisor and very likely her secret husband. There was no public ceremony, no announcement, but historians suspect a private marriage happened around 1774. Together, they are a force. Potemkin doesn't just offer Catherine affection, he offers strategy, stability, and vision. He conquers Crimea for Russia, builds cities, reshapes borders. Catherine supports him at every turn, even when he's away commanding armies. They exchange hundreds of letters filled with jokes, flirtation, and unfiltered opinions about everyone at court. She calls him my dear friend, my soul, and occasionally less publishable things. But as passionate as their bond is, it's not built for permanence in the traditional sense. Potemkin becomes volatile, temperamental, prone to bursts of paranoia. Catherine eventually appoints him to a more distant post, and their romance cools into a deep friendship. But they never stop loving each other. Even as she takes new lovers, often young, often hand-picked by Potemkin himself, he remains her anchor. Here's your historical fact. Grigory Potemkin organised the annexation of Crimea into the Russian Empire in 1783, a political move that remains controversial to this day. The region has been fought over for centuries, and Potemkin's legacy there is still hotly debated. And your quirky fact. The phrase, Potemkin village, comes from him. The story goes that during Catherine's grand tour of Crimea, Potemkin had fake villages built along the route to impress her, empty facades designed to make the region look more prosperous than it actually was. Historians now believe this tale was likely exaggerated by his enemies, but the term stuck, becoming shorthand for any hollow display of success. Now let's dive into the debate. Was their relationship truly romantic, or a marriage of political minds disguised as passion? Some scholars argue that Catherine needed Potemkin less for love and more for nation-building, that theirs was a calculated alliance. Others insist their letters revealed genuine affection, an emotional depth that Catherine rarely shared with anyone else. One thing's clear. Potemkin was the only man she seemed to trust completely. and that alone says volumes. By the time Potemkin dies in 1791, likely from an infection while travelling, the world around Catherine seems dimmer. She mourns him deeply, keeps his portrait nearby, and refers to him as her only true friend. She rules another 5 years, but nothing quite fills the void he leaves behind. As you walk through the grand corridors of the Winter Palace, you can almost feel the chill where he once stood. This was more than a fling. This was love wrapped in armour, strategy seasoned with longing. They didn't need to be seen to be known. They weren't clinging to tradition. They were rewriting it. So next time someone tells you that Catherine the Great was all power and no heart, you can gently correct them. She had heart. She just gave it to a man who could keep up. The air around you is colder now, heavy with fur-lined cloaks and snow-dusted stone. You're in Imperial Russia, surrounded by frost and candlelight, the kind that flickers more from tension than from wind. The palace is vast, echoing with secrets and footsteps that hesitate just before turning corners, and standing at the very heart of it all with a sly smile and a dagger-sharp mind is Catherine the Great. No tiara-wearing pushover. This is a woman who didn't just wear the crown. She wrestled it from her husband's cold hands and rewrote the story of an empire. But even she wasn't immune to temptation, and for Catherine, temptation had a name: Grigory Potemkin. Let's back up, though, because Catherine doesn't start at the top. Born Sophie of Anhalt-Zerbst, she's a minor German princess who marries into the Russian royal family at just 16. Her husband, Peter III, is, how do we put this delicately, an absolute weirdo. He worships Frederick the Great, plays with toy soldiers in bed, and makes zero effort to hide his disdain for Russia. Catherine endures him, barely, while secretly learning Russian, studying philosophy, and aligning herself with powerful allies. When the moment's right, she stages a coup. Peter is arrested and conveniently dies soon after. It's never officially pinned on her, but let's be honest, nobody's crying into their vodka over it. Now firmly on the throne, Catherine rules with intelligence, flair, and the kind of political savvy that makes most men look like distracted toddlers. She modernises Russia, expands its territory, sponsors the arts, and corresponds with Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire. But she's also lonely. She craves companionship, both intellectual and, let's just say, otherwise. Enter Grigory Potemkin. He's not her first lover, not by a long shot, but he's different. A military genius, fiercely loyal and charming in the way that dangerous people often are. The moment they meet, sparks fly. Potemkin quickly rises through the ranks, becoming both Catherine's advisor and very likely her secret husband. There was no public ceremony, no announcement, but historians suspect a private marriage happened around 1774. Together, they are a force. Potemkin doesn't just offer Catherine affection, he offers strategy, stability, and vision. He conquers Crimea for Russia, builds cities, reshapes borders. Catherine supports him at every turn, even when he's away commanding armies. They exchange hundreds of letters, filled with jokes, flirtation, and unfiltered opinions about everyone at court. She calls him my dear friend, my soul, and occasionally less publishable things. But as passionate as their bond is, it's not built for permanence in the traditional sense. Potemkin becomes volatile, temperamental, prone to bursts of paranoia. Catherine eventually appoints him to a more distant post, and their romance cools into a deep friendship, but they never stop loving each other. Even as she takes new lovers, often young, often handpicked by Potemkin himself, he remains her anchor. Here's your historical fact. Grigory Potemkin organised the annexation of Crimea into the Russian Empire in 1783. A political move that remains controversial to this day. The region has been fought over for centuries, and Potemkin's legacy there is still hotly debated. And your quirky fact. The phrase, Potemkin village, comes from him. The story goes that during Catherine's grand tour of Crimea, Potemkin had fake villages built along the route to impress her, empty facades designed to make the region look more prosperous than it actually was. Historians now believe this tale was likely exaggerated by his enemies, but the term stuck, becoming shorthand for any hollow display of success. Now let's dive into the debate. Was their relationship truly romantic, or a marriage of political minds disguised as passion? Some scholars argue that Catherine needed Potemkin less for love and more for nation building, that theirs was a calculated alliance. Others insist their letters reveal genuine affection, an emotional depth that Catherine rarely shared with anyone else. One thing's clear. Potemkin was the only man she seemed to trust completely, and that alone says volumes. By the time Potemkin dies in 1791, likely from an infection while travelling, the world around Catherine seems dimmer. She mourns him deeply, keeps his portrait nearby, and refers to him as her only true friend. She rules another 5 years, but nothing quite fills the void he leaves behind. As you walk through the grand corridors of the Winter Palace, you can almost feel the chill where he once stood. This was more than a fling. This was love wrapped in armour, strategy seasoned with longing. They didn't need to be seen to be known. They weren't clinging to tradition. They were rewriting it. So next time someone tells you that Catherine the Great was all power and no heart, you can gently correct them. She had heart. She just gave it to a man who could keep up. The wind carries a different rhythm now, crisper, scented faintly with gunpowder and ambition. You're walking through post-revolution France, where marble statues have been decapitated and men who once shouted about liberty are now whispering about power. This is the age of generals turned emperors, of fashion that mirrors military uniforms, and of one man who rises above the chaos like a cannonball in a ballroom. Napoleon Bonaparte. Short in stature, long in ego, and eternally restless, he's not just changing Europe, he's trying to bend it to his will. And in the quiet corner of his life, wrapped in lace and contradiction, is his first great love, Josephine de Beauharnais. To be fair, Josephine isn't her real name. She was born Marie-Joseph Rose Tachère de la Pagerie in Martinique, grew up surrounded by sugarcane and scandal, and was married off young to a French nobleman who later got guillotined during the Revolution. That left her widowed, stylish, and unusually resilient. By the time she meets Napoleon, she's already a mother, a flirt, and a woman used to survival. Napoleon, meanwhile, is a nobody with big dreams, a Corsican upstart making a name for himself on the battlefield. When they meet in 1795, he's immediately enchanted. She's older, sophisticated, and completely out of his league. That, of course, only makes him want her more. He writes her letters that border on obsessive. They're sweaty, needy, and sometimes awkwardly poetic. "Don't bathe," he tells her once. "I'm coming home." Romantic, questionable, passionate, definitely. They marry in 1796, but not without hesitation. Josephine forgets to tell him she's already been sleeping with another man. When he finds out, after the wedding, he's furious. But Napoleon, for all his rage, is also wrapped around her little finger. He storms off to conquer Italy, and even there, mid-campaign, he's still scribbling love notes between battles. Their relationship is as volatile as one of his artillery units. While he's away, she has affairs. When he returns, he does too. Yet, they remain, tangled. Two people caught between affection, ambition, and a growing imbalance. Josephine is more popular in Paris than he is. She knows how to move through salons and courts, how to smile without promising, how to survive revolutions with grace. Napoleon, in contrast, is increasingly obsessed with legacy. And that, in the end, is what breaks them. By 1804, Napoleon declares himself Emperor of the French. Josephine becomes Empress. It's the height of everything they've fought for, but it's also the beginning of the end. She can't give him a child, and for Napoleon that means no heir, no dynasty, no future. After years of waiting, he makes the brutal decision: divorce. It's formal, almost theatrical. They sit side by side in a solemn ceremony, both crying, both broken. Josephine signs the document with dignity, stands up, and walks out of the palace, but never out of his heart. He arranges for her to live at Château de Malmaison, a luxurious estate filled with roses, swans, and memories. He continues to write her, visit her, and send gifts. Even after marrying Marie-Louise of Austria and finally fathering a son, Napoleon still dreams of Josephine. Your historical fact? Josephine de Beauharnais became France's first empress when Napoleon crowned himself in Notre Dame Cathedral in 1804. He actually took the crown from the Pope's hands and placed it on his own head, because humility was not part of the uniform. And here's your fringe fact. Josephine had a deep obsession with botany and built one of the most impressive private gardens in Europe. She collected plants from around the world and is partly responsible for introducing the dahlia to France. Even in heartbreak, she was cultivating beauty. Now the scholarly debate. Was their relationship genuine love, or was Josephine simply Napoleon's ticket into high society? Some argue she manipulated him, using his rising fame to maintain her social position. Others say his love for her was one of the few things in his life that wasn't strategic, that he needed her poise, her cool-headed charm to balance his intensity. Maybe it was both. Maybe she was his teacher in refinement, and he was her second chance. Josephine died in 1814, alone but not forgotten. When Napoleon was exiled to Elba, and later to St. Helena, he reportedly kept a locket with her portrait and whispered her name in his final hours. Not his wife, Marie-Louise, not his mother, not even his beloved soldiers, Josephine. So here's what you're left with. A love that rose alongside an empire and fell just as dramatically. Two people who tried to hold on as history shoved them forward. And even when power demanded separation, affection lingered like perfume on an embroidered glove. Some affairs rewrite laws, others rewrite hearts. This one may have done both. The fog hangs low over Victorian London tonight, coiling around gas lamps and chimney smoke, thick with secrets and scandal. You step into a darker world now, not of love letters and palace balls, but of whispers behind drawing room curtains, of rumours muttered in smoking lounges, and of one royal figure who never quite made it to the throne but managed to ignite more gossip than many who wore the crown. Meet Prince Albert Victor, Duke of Clarence and Avondale, the grandson of Queen Victoria, second in line to the British throne, and possibly the most mysterious royal never to rule. Born in 1864, Albert Victor, or Eddie as his family called him, was charming in a foggy glass kind of way. He was handsome, tall, well-dressed, and thoroughly unremarkable in conversation. Tutors reportedly struggled with his education. One described him as kind but slow-witted. Still, he was a prince, and in Victorian Britain that meant pressure. Pressure to marry, to act with dignity, and most of all to avoid public disgrace. Which didn't exactly happen. Let's start with the big one. In 1889, the Cleveland Street scandal exploded. A male brothel in central London was raided, and its client list included aristocrats, military officers, and allegedly Prince Eddie himself. The government scrambled to hush things up, threatening witnesses, sealing documents, and pressuring the press. While nothing was ever confirmed, the stench of royal involvement lingered like cheap cologne. Even today, some believe the scandal was smothered to protect the monarchy from being linked to homosexuality, which was a criminal offence at the time. For context, this is the same era that sent Oscar Wilde to prison for loving the wrong person. And then, because one royal scandal is never enough, Prince Albert Victor's name pops up in another darker chapter, the Jack the Ripper murders. That's right. Some conspiracy theorists argue that Eddie was the infamous killer who terrorised London's East End in 1888. The logic is shaky, to put it gently. Most historians agree he lacked both the motive and, frankly, the intelligence for such gruesome precision. But the idea was irresistible to the public. What better boogeyman than a royal hiding behind polished boots and a thick moustache? Now the royal family needed a reputation boost, so in 1891, Albert Victor was engaged to Princess Mary of Teck. She was elegant, proper, and very much the right kind of bride. Everything seemed set for a new chapter, until fate, as usual, had other ideas. Just weeks before their wedding, Albert Victor caught influenza during a brutal winter wave. He died at the age of 28, in a chilly country house surrounded by stunned relatives. The monarchy exhaled, relieved or devastated, depending on who you ask. Here's your historical fact. Princess Mary, who was supposed to marry Albert Victor, went on to marry his younger brother George, who eventually became King George V. She became Queen Mary, the formidable matriarch of the modern Windsor line. Talk about an emotional plot twist. And the quirky fringe detail. Albert Victor had a love of fashionable neckties and was known to collect them obsessively. Some contemporaries claimed his wardrobe rivaled that of a Parisian dandy. Not exactly damning, but when your public image is already slipping, it didn't help. Now let's stir the scholarly debate. Was Prince Albert Victor a misunderstood and unlucky aristocrat? Or was he being quietly managed by a royal PR machine that couldn't risk another scandal? Some historians paint him as a victim, gentle, passive, and overwhelmed by the role he never asked for. Others believe his indiscretions were covered up so thoroughly, We'll never know the full extent. Letters were burned, files sealed, witnesses silenced, and the rumour mill, it never stopped churning. Even in death, Albert Victor haunts the monarchy. His story is the kind that invites obsession, a man born into power but unsuited for it, groomed for greatness but remembered for scandal. His legacy isn't a law or a battle or a speech, it's a collection of unanswered questions, and you, walking now past the wrought iron gates of St. George's Chapel in Windsor, where his tomb rests beneath a cold marble canopy, might feel a chill that has nothing to do with the weather. You're looking at a royal ghost, a man who never ruled but whose shadow still lingers in the corners of British history. Maybe that's why they called him Eddie. It sounds like something that slips away before you can grab it. A ripple, a breath, a prince, a scandal, a maybe murderer, a maybe martyr. Take your pick. The fog hangs low over Victorian London tonight, coiling around gas lamps and chimney smoke, thick with secrets and scandal. You step into a darker world now, not of love letters and palace balls, but of whispers behind drawing-room curtains, of rumours muttered in smoking lounges, and of one royal figure who never quite made it to the throne but managed to ignite more gossip than many who wore the crown. Meet Prince Albert Victor, Duke of Clarence and Avondale, the grandson of Queen Victoria, second in line to the British throne, and possibly the most mysterious royal never to rule. Born in 1864, Albert Victor, or Eddie, as his family called him, was charming in a foggy glass kind of way. He was handsome, tall, well-dressed, and thoroughly unremarkable in conversation. Tutors reportedly struggled with his education. One described him as kind but slow-witted. Still, he was a prince, and in Victorian Britain that meant pressure. Pressure to marry, to act with dignity, and most of all to avoid public disgrace, which didn't exactly happen. Let's start with the big one. In 1889, the Cleveland Street scandal exploded. A male brothel in central London was raided, and its client list included aristocrats, military officers, and allegedly Prince Eddie himself. The government scrambled to hush things up, threatening witnesses, sealing documents, and pressuring the press. While nothing was ever confirmed, the stench of royal involvement lingered like cheap cologne. Even today, some believe the scandal was smothered to protect the monarchy from being linked to homosexuality, which was a criminal offence at the time. For context, this is the same era that sent Oscar Wilde to prison for loving the wrong person. And then, because one royal scandal is never enough, Prince Albert Victor's name pops up in another darker chapter, the Jack the Ripper murders. That's right. Some conspiracy theorists argue that Eddie was the infamous killer who terrorised London's East End in 1888. The logic is shaky, to put it gently. Most historians agree he lacked both the motive and, frankly, the intelligence for such gruesome precision. But the idea was irresistible to the public. What better boogeyman than a royal hiding behind polished boots and a thick moustache? Now, the royal family needed a reputation boost, so in 1891 Albert Victor was engaged to Princess Mary of Teck. She was elegant, proper, and very much the right kind of bride. Everything seemed set for a new chapter, until fate, as usual, had other ideas. Just weeks before their wedding, Albert Victor caught influenza during a brutal winter wave. He died at the age of 28 in a chilly country house surrounded by stunned relatives. The monarchy exhaled, relieved or devastated depending on who you ask. Here's your historical fact. Princess Mary, who was supposed to marry Albert Victor, went on to marry his younger brother George, who eventually became King George V. She became Queen Mary, the formidable matriarch of the modern Windsor line. Talk about an emotional plot twist. And the quirky fringe detail? Albert Victor had a love of fashionable neckties and was known to collect them obsessively. Some contemporaries claimed his wardrobe rivaled that of a Parisian dandy. Not exactly damning, but when your public image is already slipping, it didn't help. Now let's stir the scholarly debate. Was Prince Albert Victor a misunderstood and unlucky aristocrat, or was he being quietly managed by a royal PR machine that couldn't risk another scandal? Some historians paint him as a victim, gentle, passive, and overwhelmed by the role he never asked for. Others believe his indiscretions were covered up so thoroughly we'll never know the full extent. Letters were burned, files sealed, witnesses silenced, and the rumour mill? It never stopped churning. Even in death, Albert Victor haunts the monarchy. His story is the kind that invites obsession, a man born into power but unsuited for it, groomed for greatness but remembered for scandal. His legacy isn't a law or a battle or a speech, it's a collection of unanswered questions. And you, walking now past the wrought iron gates of St. George's Chapel in Windsor, where his tomb rests beneath a cold marble canopy, might feel a chill that has nothing to do with the weather. You're looking at a royal ghost, a man who never ruled but whose shadow still lingers in the corners of British history. Maybe that's why they called him Eddie. It sounds like something that slips away before you can grab it. A ripple, a breath, a prince, a scandal, a maybe murderer, a maybe martyr. Take your pick. You're stepping into the polished stillness of Vienna now, where everything feels carved from marble and protocol. The chandeliers hang just a little too perfectly. The air smells faintly of lemon oil and pressed linen, and the silence isn't peaceful. It's disciplined. You're inside the Habsburg Empire, where generations of rulers have treated love like a chess move and married their cousins, because it made sense on a map. But in the middle of all this rigidity stands a woman who quietly, almost invisibly, wrestles with her role. Maria Theresa of Austria, empress, matriarch, and yes, a woman with just enough defiance to be dangerous. And buried deep inside her 40-year reign is a forbidden affair, or at least the whisper of one, that would ripple through her ironclad court. Now, Maria Theresa isn't the type to faint in a garden or leave poetry tucked under pillows. She's formidable. When her father dies in 1740 and leaves her the throne, most of Europe rolls its eyes and reaches for a sword. She responds by defending her empire through 8 pregnancies, 2 wars, and one political disaster after another. She's known for her discipline, her Catholic piety, and her terrifying ability to multitask between statecraft and childbirth. No one expects her to entertain romantic scandal, which makes this next part intriguing. Enter Count Franz von Trapp. Wait, no, wrong century. Franz Stephan of Lorraine, her husband. They genuinely love each other, which is kind of rare in this era of arranged misery. But while Maria Theresa is faithful to him, Franz Stephan is not, exactly returning the favour. He's charming, sociable, and as loose with his affections as he is with his finances. His affairs are whispered about openly in court, and it's said Maria Theresa was aware of them, and privately devastated. But while that was typical royal nonsense, the more eyebrow-raising possibility is her close, possibly too close, relationship with one of her court favourites, Count Karl von Battiani. He's dashing, unmarried, often at her side, and mentioned frequently in her private letters with unusual warmth. Some notes suggest an affection deeper than political loyalty, something tinged with longing. No romantic language is ever overt, but this is a woman who measured every syllable like a diplomat. The question hangs in the air, unspeakable and unanswered. Was the Holy Roman Empress secretly in love with someone who wasn't her husband? Now before the court could even sharpen its knives, tragedy strikes. In 1765, Franz Stephan dies suddenly of a heart attack. Maria Theresa is gutted. She dons widow's black and never takes it off. For the next 15 years, she dresses in mourning, refuses balls, avoids music, and surrounds herself with portraits of her late husband. But even then, Count Battiani remains close, quietly loyal, an unspoken comfort during her grieving years. He never marries. He never leaves her side. So here's your historical fact. Maria Theresa was the only female ruler of the Habsburg dominions and the last of the House of Habsburg. Through her 16 children, yes, 16, she placed her offspring on thrones all over Europe, including France, where her daughter Marie Antoinette would meet a rather famous end. Your quirky fringe fact. After her husband's death, Maria Theresa had his heart removed and placed in a special urn at the Augustinian church in Vienna. His body was buried separately in the Capuchin crypt, because nothing says true love like storing someone's organs in decorative jars across the city. Now let's lean into the scholarly debate. Was there truly a romantic entanglement between Maria Theresa and Count Battiani, or was it simply a rare friendship in a court where emotion was rationed like sugar? Some historians believe she was emotionally dependent on him, possibly even infatuated in her widowhood. Others argue it was entirely platonic, that Maria Theresa's strict Catholic morality would never allow anything more. But the intensity of their connection and his perpetual presence makes you wonder. Maybe it wasn't physical. Maybe it didn't need to be. Imagine this: a ruler who carries a crumbling empire on her back, who weathers betrayal and childbirth and bureaucratic warfare, all while nursing a love she can never voice, a love that has no name, no wedding, no diary confession, just glances across candlelit desks and private letters that avoid the word longing, but circle it like a hawk. In the stiff world of Viennese court life, where every smile is political and every sigh is suspect, that kind of silent affection may have been the loudest rebellion of all. So when you walk through Schönbrunn Palace, past portraits of the Empress in black lace, eyes heavy with something unspoken, remember, not all affairs are physical. Some are etched in restraint, framed in ritual, and carried like a relic until death. Now you find yourself in the Scottish Highlands, not literally, but somewhere between the fog of royal protocol and the wind-tossed moors of emotional scandal. The year is somewhere in the late 19th century, and Queen Victoria, the tiny widow in black who reigned for over 6 decades, is deep in mourning. She has worn her grief like armour since Prince Albert's death in 1861, refusing colour, withdrawing from public life, and essentially turning Windsor Castle into a shrine of sorrow. But somewhere in the folds of her heavy black skirts she finds a flicker of warmth, and it comes from the most unexpected place: a servant. His name is John Brown. Scottish, gruff, not exactly court material, and precisely the kind of man Victoria needed. He's her personal gillie, a sort of outdoor attendant assigned to look after her when she retreats to Balmoral Castle. She's devastated, exhausted, and so thoroughly lonely that even her endless titles can't insulate her. Brown, with his blunt manner and lack of deference, doesn't treat her like a queen. He treats her like a woman, and that's when the trouble starts. He calls her woman, or woman, in his thick brogue, and she lets him. He orders her to eat when she's wasting away. He snaps at her when she sulks. He brings her flowers from the hills, tells her stories by the fire, and occasionally even dares to touch her hand. Scandalous, unthinkable, inappropriate, and also undeniably comforting. The rest of the court is horrified. Brown begins to appear in paintings beside the Queen. He is always at her side, always in her letters. He has his own room in the royal household. She gives him gifts, an engraved pocket watch, tailored clothes, even land. The whispers grow louder. Did she love him? Did they marry in secret? Is the Queen of England having a full-blown romance with a Scottish commoner who smells like wet dog and whiskey? The press nicknames her Mrs. Brown, which makes Buckingham Palace squirm. Ministers urge her to put distance between herself and the man who's become her shadow. But she refuses. For over 20 years he remains her most trusted companion, the person she turns to when politics fail, when family disappoints, and when grief returns like an old injury. Here's your historical fact. John Brown was given a special medal by Victoria inscribed with "Faithful Servant," and held a unique, unofficial rank within the household. Upon his death in 1883, she wrote a eulogy more heartfelt than anything she penned for most of her own children. And your fringe fact. After her death in 1901, her family found something hidden in her coffin: a lock of John Brown's hair, his photograph, and one of his handkerchiefs. She had them placed there, against the wishes of her advisers, because even in death, she wanted him near her. Now for the scholarly debate. Was this a sexual affair, a deeply intimate friendship, or something somewhere in between? A relationship that defies easy categorization. Some historians argue that the relationship was purely emotional, rooted in grief and mutual loyalty. Others point to the amount of influence he had, the private letters, and even alleged confessions from palace staff. Still, no evidence of a marriage has ever surfaced, despite rumours that they wed in secret during a private ceremony, witnessed only by Brown's brother and a clergyman. But here's the emotional truth, regardless of paperwork. Victoria adored him. She defended him with a ferocity that baffled her ministers. After his death, she descended into another prolonged mourning period, referring to it as losing my best friend. When one of her own children made a snide remark about Brown, she exploded with uncharacteristic rage. That's not courtly decorum, that's heartbreak. So what does it mean when a queen, the literal symbol of empire, becomes emotionally entangled with a man from a completely different world? Maybe it means grief makes equals of us all. Maybe it means even the most powerful woman in the world just wanted someone who didn't flinch at her title. You can almost picture them now, walking side by side through the damp woods of Balmoral, her hand brushing his arm, no guards in sight, just two figures against a grey sky. She speaks softly, he listens, and for a moment, she isn't Her Majesty. She's just a woman, broken and healing, finding comfort not in a crown, but in calloused hands and a voice that speaks plainly. When John Brown dies, Queen Victoria orders a life-size statue of him placed in the gardens at Balmoral. Later, when she's gone and her son Edward VII takes over, the first thing he does is remove it. But the mark had already been made. You're drifting now on a warm island breeze, the kind that carries a slow melancholy beneath its scent of plumeria and salt. The sun hangs lower here, softer than the ones that blaze over imperial capitals. You're in Honolulu, and the year is somewhere in the fading light of the 19th century. The monarchy of Hawaii stands on a cliff's edge, its roots still strong in tradition, but its branches cracking under the weight of foreign greed. And standing at the heart of this slow-burning tragedy is a young woman with ocean eyes and a quiet storm in her heart, Princess Kaiulani. She's not your typical royal. Born in 1875 to a Hawaiian princess and a Scottish businessman, Victoria Kaiulani Cleghorn grows up between two worlds. Her first name is an homage to Queen Victoria, her godmother. Her middle name, a tether to her Polynesian bloodline. She plays in the royal gardens of Ainahau but also speaks fluent English, reads poetry, and rides horses like she was born on the Scottish moors. She's poised, beautiful, and frighteningly aware of the forces closing in on her kingdom. And then he enters the story. He's not a prince or a diplomat. He's not even Hawaiian. He's Clive Davies, a dashing young man of British descent, a family friend, and someone no one expects to become more than a playmate. But their childhood friendship deepens into something else, something dangerous for a girl with a crown on her head and the weight of a nation on her shoulders. By the time Kaiulani is a teenager, it's clear they are in love, but love in her case is a luxury she cannot afford. Her guardians disapprove. The royal court, already under pressure from growing American interference, cannot tolerate a scandal. Kaiulani is being groomed for leadership, possibly the future queen. Every decision she makes is a political act, and falling for a white man with no noble blood threatens to unravel what little thread of sovereignty remains. Still, they meet in secret. They walk the gardens, exchange letters. One afternoon, as the story goes, they sneak away to the outskirts of Waikik and sit beneath the hau trees, talking about what life might be like far from court, somewhere they could be anonymous. But Kaiulani is no fool. She knows duty will always come first, and by her 17th birthday the romance begins to fade, tugged apart by politics, family, and the slow erosion of hope. Then, the coup. In 1893, while Kaiulani is abroad in Europe for her education, American businessmen, backed quietly by US troops, overthrow the Hawaiian monarchy. Her aunt, Queen Liliuokalani, is deposed. Kaiulani receives the news in a flurry of telegrams and heartbreak. Almost overnight, her title becomes meaningless. She is a princess without a kingdom. But instead of collapsing, she fights. She returns to the United States, not in secret, but with headlines. She gives interviews, appears at public events, and famously addresses a crowd in New York pleading for justice. "Do not think I am weak," she says. "I am a child of the people, and I will fight for them." It's a speech that shocks American audiences. They expect a native princess to be quaint, decorative. Instead, they meet a warrior in a velvet dress. Here's your historical fact. Kaiulani's 1893 trip to the US marked the first time a Hawaiian royal addressed the American public directly to protest annexation. She was only 17 and facing not just imperialism, but layers of racial and gender bias that made her mission nearly impossible. And your fringe fact. Kaiulani had a deep love for peacocks, and her family estate was home to dozens of them. She believed they were symbols of dignity, resilience, and quiet beauty. The birds, like her, were ornamental, but fierce when cornered. Now the scholarly debate. Was her relationship with Clive Davies a true romance cruelly snuffed out, or a passing crush amplified by nostalgia and myth? There are few written records, mostly anecdotal recollections and fragments of letters. Some suggest that Clive proposed, and Karyolani refused out of duty. Others argue that it was never serious, merely a teenage dream. But what endures is the sense that, for a brief moment, she saw a future beyond palace walls and chose her people over her heart. Karyolani died in 1899 at just 23 years old. The official cause was inflammatory rheumatism, worsened by pneumonia, but many in Hawaii say she died of a broken heart, of betrayal, of watching her homeland devoured by foreign interests while the world applauded. You can still visit her grave at Oahu Cemetery. It's simple, quiet, often covered in fresh flowers placed there by strangers, and sometimes you'll hear peacocks calling in the distance. So when you think about forbidden royal affairs, don't just picture palaces and scandals. Picture a girl on a lost island, loving someone she couldn't keep, and choosing a kingdom that wouldn't survive. Not all heartbreaks are dramatic. Some echo like surf against the shore, endlessly, gently, and forever unfinished. You're moving now into the shadows of Bavarian forests, where mist curls through mountaintops and the castles look like they were sketched by a daydreaming architect high on fairy tales and melancholy. The world has shifted into something more romantic and sad, where everything feels like it might be painted on the inside of a music box. This is the kingdom of Ludwig II of Bavaria, the fairy tale king, a ruler more interested in opera and swans than war and bureaucracy. He lived in isolation, spent millions on castles no one asked for, and left behind a trail of rumours as strange and glittering as the mirrored halls he built. And yes, there was love, hidden, complicated, forbidden. Born in 1845, Ludwig became king at just 18. From the beginning, he seemed different. He avoided public functions, refused to marry, and was famously shy to the point of near invisibility. But when he loved something, he loved it to excess. Architecture, music, Richard Wagner. Ludwig adored Wagner to the point of obsession, funding the composer's works and even building an opera house just to showcase his genius. Some historians believe Ludwig's feelings for Wagner went far beyond artistic admiration. Letters from Ludwig to the composer read like a storm of unrequited yearning. "My one true friend," he wrote, "you have held me as no one else ever will." But Wagner, older, married, deeply self-interested. He took the money and flattery, but he never returned Ludwig's affection, not the way the king so clearly hoped. Still, Ludwig poured funds into Wagner's projects and even dreamed of retiring to live with him in artistic seclusion. But his court advisors, alarmed by Wagner's influence and the whiff of scandal, forced the composer into exile. Ludwig was devastated, but he obeyed. His heart, it seems, never really recovered. Then came the castles. Ludwig poured his longing, his imagination and his loneliness into stone. Neuschwanstein, Linderhof, Herrenchiemsee, all glorious, unpractical dreams built in remote mountains and woodlands. Neuschwanstein in particular feels like a diary carved into marble. Turrets for solitude, murals of tragic lovers, ceilings painted with scenes from Wagner's operas. The entire structure is a love letter, beautiful, haunting, and very, very private. But castles weren't the only things Ludwig kept secret. There were rumours of young men visiting the king's bedchambers, of letters written and quickly destroyed, of quiet arrangements made with trusted servants. Homosexuality was criminal at the time, especially for someone of royal blood. The threat of scandal loomed constantly, and Ludwig, already fragile, withdrew further into fantasy. One of the few people he seemed to trust deeply, and possibly love, was Paul von Thurn on Taxis, a young aristocrat known for his poetry and drama. Their correspondence, at least the parts that survive, is undeniably romantic. Paul calls Ludwig my angel, my only joy, while Ludwig writes with dreamy longing and veiled sadness. For a while, they're inseparable. Then Paul marries, a move that feels like betrayal. Ludwig cuts ties. Another heartbreak, another door locked. Eventually, Ludwig's isolation reaches dangerous levels. His ministers become alarmed. He spends wildly, refuses state audiences, speaks to no one but servants and architects. In 1886, they declare him insane, based on second-hand testimony, not a single medical examination. He's arrested and removed from his beloved Neuschwanstein. 2 days later, he's found dead in Lake Starnberg alongside his doctor. The official cause? Suicide by drowning. But conspiracy theorists still whisper about murder, cover-ups, and political convenience. His death, like his life, remains wrapped in mist. Here's your historical fact. Ludwig II never fought a war, never led a major political movement, but his architectural legacy still defines the image of Germany's romantic past. Neuschwanstein Castle is visited by over 1 million tourists a year and famously inspired Disney's Cinderella Castle. Now your quirky fringe detail. Ludwig was obsessed with swans, particularly the Swan Knight from Wagner's opera Lohengrin. He filled his castles with swan motifs, from sculptures to tapestries to embossed cutlery. Even his bathtub had a swan spout that poured perfumed water. The man really committed to his aesthetic. And the scholarly debate: was Ludwig's mental health truly unstable, or was he simply a deeply introverted, sensitive man trapped in an extroverted, militarized world? Some argue he suffered from schizophrenia or severe depression. Others say he was merely non-conforming, a gay man in an era that offered no safe space for him to be whole. Was his retreat into fantasy a breakdown or a rebellion? Was he mad, or simply misaligned with the brutal normalcy of kingship? Regardless, his story is one of beauty forged through heartbreak. A man who couldn't live openly, so he built cathedrals to the life he was denied, who loved secretly, dangerously, and left behind palaces of longing in the snow. As you walk now through the empty halls of Neuschwanstein, where every corridor leads to a mural of a doomed prince or a lonely god, you feel the ache Ludwig left behind. Not madness, not scandal, just the quiet, echoing cry of someone who dared to dream love into stone. You're drifting now on a warm island breeze, the kind that carries a slow melancholy beneath its scent of plumeria and salt. The sun hangs lower here, softer than the ones that blaze over imperial capitals. You're in Honolulu, and the year is somewhere in the fading light of the 19th century. The monarchy of Hawaii stands on a cliff's edge, its roots still strong in tradition, but its branches cracking under the weight of foreign greed. And standing at the heart of this slow-burning tragedy is a young woman with ocean eyes and a quiet storm in her heart, Princess Ka'iulani. She is not your typical royal. Born in 1875 to a Hawaiian princess and a Scottish businessman, Victoria Ka'iulani Cleghorn grows up between two worlds. Her first name is an homage to Queen Victoria, her godmother. Her middle name, a tether to her Polynesian bloodline. She plays in the royal gardens of Ainahau but also speaks fluent English, reads poetry, and rides horses like she was born on the Scottish moors. She's poised, beautiful, and frighteningly aware of the forces closing in on her kingdom. And then he enters the story. He's not a prince or a diplomat. He's not even Hawaiian. He's Clive Davies, a dashing young man of British descent, a family friend, and someone no one expects to become more than a playmate. But their childhood friendship deepens into something else, something dangerous for a girl with a crown on her head and the weight of a nation on her shoulders. By the time Ka'iulani is a teenager, it's clear. They are in love. But love, in her case, is a luxury she cannot afford. Her guardians disapprove. The royal court, already under pressure from growing American interference, cannot tolerate a scandal. Ka'iulani is being groomed for leadership, possibly the future queen. Every decision she makes is a political act, and falling for a white man with no noble blood threatens to unravel what little thread of sovereignty remains. Still, they meet in secret. They walk the gardens, exchange letters. One afternoon, as the story goes, they sneak away to the outskirts of Wikek and sit beneath the hau trees, talking about what life might be like far from court. Somewhere they could be anonymous. But Ka'iulani is no fool. She knows duty will always come first, and by her 17th birthday the romance begins to fade, tugged apart by politics, family, and the slow erosion of hope. Then, the coup. In 1893, while Ka'iulani is abroad in Europe for her education, American businessmen, backed quietly by US troops, overthrow the Hawaiian monarchy. Her aunt, Queen Liliuokalani, is deposed. Ka'iulani receives the news in a flurry of telegrams and heartbreak. Almost overnight, her title becomes meaningless. She's a princess without a kingdom, but instead of collapsing, she fights. She returns to the United States, not in secret, but with headlines. She gives interviews, appears at public events, and famously addresses a crowd in New York pleading for justice. "Do not think I am weak," she says. "I am a child of the people, and I will fight for them." It's a speech that shocks American audiences. They expect a native princess to be quaint, decorative. Instead, they meet a warrior in a velvet dress. Here's your historical fact. Kaiulani's 1893 trip to the US marked the first time a Hawaiian royal addressed the American public directly to protest annexation. She was only 17, and facing not just imperialism, but layers of racial and gender bias that made her mission nearly impossible. And your fringe fact. Kaiulani had a deep love for peacocks, and her family estate was home to dozens of them. She believed they were symbols of dignity, resilience, and quiet beauty. The birds, like her, were ornamental, but fierce when cornered. Now the scholarly debate. Was her relationship with Clive Davies a true romance cruelly snuffed out, or a passing crush amplified by nostalgia and myth? There are few written records, mostly anecdotal recollections and fragments of letters. Some suggest that Clive proposed and Kaiulani refused out of duty. Others argue that it was never serious, merely a teenage dream. But what endures is the sense that, for a brief moment, she saw a future beyond palace walls and chose her people over her heart. Kaiulani died in 1899, at just 23 years old. The official cause was inflammatory rheumatism, worsened by pneumonia, but many in Hawaii say she died of a broken heart, of betrayal, of watching her homeland devoured by foreign interest while the world applauded. You can still visit her grave at Oahu Cemetery. It's simple, quiet, often covered in fresh flowers placed there by strangers, and sometimes you'll hear peacocks calling in the distance. So when you think about forbidden royal affairs, don't just picture palaces and scandals. Picture a girl on a lost island, loving someone she couldn't keep, and choosing a kingdom that wouldn't survive. Not all heartbreaks are dramatic. Some echo like surf against the shore, endlessly, gently, and forever unfinished. You're moving now into the shadows of Bavarian forests, where mist curls through mountain tops, and the castles look like they were sketched by a daydreaming architect, high on fairy tales and melancholy. The world has shifted into something more romantic and sad, where everything feels like it might be painted on the inside of a music box. This is the kingdom of Ludwig II of Bavaria, the fairy tale king, a ruler more interested in opera and swans than war and bureaucracy. He lived in isolation, spent millions on castles no one asked for, and left behind a trail of rumours as strange and glittering as the mirrored halls he built. And yes, there was love. Hidden, complicated, forbidden. Born in 1845, Ludwig became king at just 18. From the beginning he seemed different. He avoided public functions, refused to marry, and was famously shy to the point of near invisibility. But when he loved something, he loved it to excess. Architecture, music, Richard Wagner. Ludwig adored Wagner to the point of obsession, funding the composer's works and even building an opera house just to showcase his genius. Some historians believe Ludwig's feelings for Wagner went far beyond artistic admiration. Letters from Ludwig to the composer read like a storm of unrequited yearning. "My one true friend," he wrote, "you have held me as no one else ever will." But Wagner? Older, married, deeply self-interested. He took the money and flattery, but he never returned Ludwig's affection. Not the way the king so clearly hoped. Still, Ludwig poured funds into Wagner's projects, and even dreamed of retiring to live with him in artistic seclusion. But his court advisors, alarmed by Wagner's influence and the whiff of scandal, forced the composer into exile. Ludwig was devastated, but he obeyed. His heart, it seems, never really recovered. Then came the castles. Ludwig poured his longing, his imagination, and his loneliness into stone. Neuschwanstein, Linderhof, Herrenchiemsee, all glorious, unpractical dreams built in remote mountains and woodlands. Neuschwanstein in particular feels like a diary carved into marble. Turrets for solitude, murals of tragic lovers, ceilings painted with scenes from Wagner's operas. The entire structure is a love letter. Beautiful, haunting, and very, very private. But castles weren't the only things Ludwig kept secret. There were rumours of young men visiting the king's bedchambers, of letters written and quickly destroyed, of quiet arrangements made with trusted servants. Homosexuality was criminal at the time, especially for someone of royal blood. The threat of scandal loomed constantly, and Ludwig, already fragile, withdrew further into fantasy. One of the few people he seemed to trust deeply, and possibly love, was Paul von Thurn on Taxis, a young aristocrat known for his poetry and drama. Their correspondence, at least the parts that survive, is undeniably romantic. Paul calls Ludwig my angel, my only joy, while Ludwig writes with dreamy longing and veiled sadness. For a while, they're inseparable. Then Paul marries, a move that feels like betrayal. Ludwig cuts ties. Another heartbreak, another door locked. Eventually, Ludwig's isolation reaches dangerous levels. His ministers become alarmed. He spends wildly, refuses state audiences, speaks to no one but servants and architects. In 1886, they declare him insane, based on second-hand testimony, not a single medical examination. He's arrested and removed from his beloved Neuschwanstein. 2 days later, he's found dead in Lake Starnberg alongside his doctor. The official cause, suicide by drowning. But conspiracy theorists still whisper about murder, cover-ups and political convenience. His death, like his life, remains wrapped in mist. Here's your historical fact. Ludwig II never fought a war, never led a major political movement, but his architectural legacy still defines the image of Germany's romantic past. Neuschwanstein Castle is visited by over 1 million tourists a year and famously inspired Disney's Cinderella Castle. Now your quirky fringe detail. Ludwig was obsessed with swans, particularly the Swan Knight from Wagner's opera Lohengrin. He filled his castles with swan motifs, from sculptures to tapestries to embossed cutlery. Even his bathtub had a swan spout that poured perfumed water. The man really committed to his aesthetic, and the scholarly debate. Was Ludwig's mental health truly unstable, or was he simply a deeply introverted, sensitive man trapped in an extroverted, militarized world? Some argue he suffered from schizophrenia or severe depression. Others say he was merely non-conforming, a gay man in an era that offered no safe space for him to be whole. Was his retreat into fantasy a breakdown or a rebellion? Was he mad, or simply misaligned with the brutal normalcy of kingship? Regardless, his story is one of beauty forged through heartbreak. A man who couldn't live openly, so he built cathedrals to the life he was denied, who loved secretly, dangerously, and left behind palaces of longing in the snow. As you walk now through the empty halls of Neuschwanstein, where every corridor leads to a mural of a doomed prince or a lonely god, you feel the ache Ludwig left behind. Not madness, not scandal, just the quiet, echoing cry of someone who dared to dream love into stone. The wallpaper changes again, this time to stiff British florals and heavy curtains that block out more than just the sun. You're in the early 20th century now, and the air is laced with pipe smoke and royal denial. Empire maps still colour half the globe in red, but the seams are coming undone. There's a certain tremor running through Buckingham Palace. Not from politics this time, but from passion. Because a prince, one so polished and proper on paper, has fallen deeply and inconveniently in love. And for the first time in centuries, the crown won't survive the relationship. Enter Edward VIII, dashing, athletic, smooth-talking. He's the kind of prince who makes people swoon at public appearances and smuggle his photograph into hat boxes. Women adore him. Men want to be him. He's the heir to the British throne, dutifully bland on the outside, emotionally combustible underneath. And then he meets her. Wallis Simpson, American, twice divorced, older, and absolutely, categorically not the sort of woman a future king is supposed to pursue. But Edward doesn't care. Actually, that might be putting it mildly. He falls hard. Wallis is whip-smart, witty, and knows how to hold her own in a room full of aristocrats who think she's vulgar. She calls him David, his family nickname. He calls her my beloved Wallis. They exchange hundreds of letters, some of which make Shakespeare's sonnets look emotionally reserved. Here's the thing. By the time Edward becomes king in 1936, their relationship isn't a secret. Everyone knows. Courtiers are panicking, politicians are furious. The Archbishop of Canterbury is having stress nosebleeds, because Edward, as head of the Church of England, cannot marry a divorcee whose previous husbands are still alive. It's not just bad optics, it's a constitutional crisis in a tweed suit. The pressure builds. Newspapers abroad publish photos. of them vacationing together. Wallis is being trailed by paparazzi and insulted in Parliament. People accuse her of being a gold digger, a seductress, even a Nazi spy, because nothing says British scandal like throwing in Hitler for flavour. And then, in December 1936, Edward drops a bomb. He abdicates. After just 11 months on the throne, he gives it up. Not for politics, not for peace, for her. "I have found it impossible," he says in a radio address, "to carry the heavy burden of responsibility and to discharge my duties as king without the help and support of the woman I love." Mic drop. The country is stunned. His brother Albert is shoved onto the throne as George VI, and the entire royal trajectory shifts. Wallis and Edward marry the next year, but the wounds remain fresh. The royal family snubs the wedding. They strip Wallis of the title Her Royal Highness. Queen Mary refuses to speak to her. The couple is essentially exiled to a life of lavish limbo, floating between villas in France, awkward dinners in New York, and the occasional uncomfortable visit back to Britain when the family reluctantly opens a palace door. Here's your historical fact. Edward VIII remains the only British monarch to voluntarily abdicate the throne. The monarchy had survived wars, beheadings, revolutions and scandals, but not a romance with an American divorcee. And your fringe fact? Wallis was known for wearing perfume made with civet oil, a musky scent derived from a gland in a small mammal. It was considered exotic and risque, just like her. Rumour has it Edward kept a handkerchief with her perfume on it in his coat pocket at all times. Now the debate. Oh, it's a juicy one. Was Edward's abdication a romantic sacrifice for true love, or an escape hatch from a job he never wanted? Some historians believe he used Wallis as an excuse to dodge the crushing duties of kingship. Others insist the relationship was genuine, flawed, sure, but deeply passionate. And what about Wallis? Was she manipulated into a role she never asked for? Or was she a savvy social climber who underestimated the consequences of falling for a prince? Their letters suggest intimacy and devotion, but also a whiff of codependence. Edward needed someone to adore him. Wallis needed someone to rescue her from mediocrity. Together they formed a unit the rest of the world couldn't quite figure out. They lived out their days in semi-glamorous exile, entertaining guests, attending state events as afterthoughts, and dressing like royalty without ever being allowed to fully play the part. Edward died in 1972. Wallis followed in 1986, buried next to him in Windsor, but still never fully embraced by the family that cast her out. So now you stand at the gates of that memory, watching the ghost of a king walk away from power, hand in hand with a woman who changed history by loving him back. Their affair didn't just ruffle feathers, it cracked the very structure of monarchy and proved that even crowns have soft spots. And if you're tempted to see it as a fairy tale, remember this. It didn't end with a throne. It ended with a folding chair on a French balcony, two people looking out at a world that once bowed to him and no longer did. You're walking now through the hushed corridors of Schönbrunn Palace, where golden walls once echoed with laughter that hid more sorrow than most could guess. But tonight, the hush isn't royal formality, it's grief, the kind that clings. You're following a figure in a white silk gown that trails behind her like a ghost. This is Empress Elisabeth of Austria, Sisi, to those who knew her, and eventually even to those who didn't. She's a queen who hated court life, a beauty who starved herself for control, and a woman who spent decades running, not just from Vienna, but from the role history insisted she play. Born in 1837 into Bavarian nobility, Elizabeth wasn't meant to be empress. That was supposed to be her older sister. But when Emperor Franz Joseph met Sisi, just 16 at the time, he instantly fell in love. She had wild eyes, long chestnut hair that nearly touched the floor, and a sort of fragile mischief in her spirit that he found irresistible. Within days, he proposed. She was plucked from her life of freedom and thrust into the polished trap of the Habsburg court, and that's when the gilded cage slammed shut. From the beginning, she chafed under imperial expectations. Her mother-in-law, Archduchess Sophie, monitored her every move, even taking control of Sisi's children, raising them as if Sisi were an unreliable guest, not their mother. Court protocol was suffocating. Every dinner was a performance, every outfit a public display. So Sisi responded the only way she could. She retreated inward, and eventually, outward. She became obsessed with preserving her beauty, maintaining an impossibly tiny waist by extreme dieting and punishing exercise. She wore face masks of raw veal, slept upright to protect her skin, spent hours brushing her hair, which she washed only with egg and cognac. It wasn't vanity, it was armour. Her appearance was the only thing she controlled in a world that demanded total submission. But this isn't just a tale of self-destruction. It's also about a quieter, forbidden rebellion, a relationship born not of scandalous passion, but of something almost more subversive, emotional refuge. In the 1870s, Sisi met Count Gyula Andrássy, a Hungarian statesman, revolutionary, and, as it happened, the very man her husband had sent to help appease the recently rebellious Hungarian provinces. The Count was charismatic, principled, and not afraid to speak his mind, even to the Empress. Their connection was instant. They rode together, exchanged deeply personal letters, and confided in each other about the crushing expectations they both bore. Andrássy was already married, and Sisi, of course, was Empress. But as their friendship grew, so did the rumours. Vienna's salons buzzed with speculation. Was Sisi in love with him? Had they become lovers? Did their relationship cross the boundary between loyalty and desire? There's no smoking gun, no scandalous diary entry, no confession. But what we do know is that Sisi championed Hungary fiercely, and that Andrássy became Prime Minister of Hungary in 1867 with her vocal support. Some even whispered that her youngest daughter, Marie Valerie, her Hungarian child, might not have been Franz Joseph's at all. Historians continue to debate that particular mystery, but the connection between Sisi and Andrássy was clearly profound, lasting until his death in 1890. Here's your historical fact. Elizabeth played a pivotal role in brokering the Austro-Hungarian Compromise of 1867, which created the dual monarchy of Austria-Hungary. Without her influence, and without Andrassy's trust, it might never have happened. And your fringe fact? Sisi had a tattoo. Yep, a discreet anchor inked on her shoulder during a trip to Greece, back when tattoos were absolutely not something respectable royalty did. It was a private rebellion in a life filled with hidden acts of defiance. Now for the scholarly debate. Was Elizabeth's bond with Andrássy purely platonic, or did it slide into quiet romantic territory? Some argue that her strict Catholic morals and emotional damage would have kept her from pursuing an affair. Others point to their letters, intimate, coded and affectionate, as proof that something deeper was unfolding, at least emotionally. One doesn't need consummation for an affair to shake an empire. Sometimes just feeling seen is betrayal enough. By the time Elizabeth was in her 50s, she was more myth than monarch. She travelled constantly, almost obsessively, refusing to stay in one place long enough to be trapped by it. She wore a black veil in public, avoided photographers, and often used aliases when booking travel. She once said, "I want to be a free human being, not a puppet of the state." And in some ways she succeeded, though freedom came at the cost of nearly every relationship she had. Her death, fittingly, was as strange and tragic as her life. In 1898, while visiting Geneva under a false name, she was stabbed in the heart by an Italian anarchist. He didn't even know who she was, just wanted to assassinate someone important. She collapsed slowly, at first not realizing she'd been wounded. Hours later, she was dead. Her husband, Emperor Franz Joseph, was shattered. He said, "You don't know how much I love that woman." But maybe Andrássy did. So now you stand beneath the flickering light of a Viennese chandelier, the room half empty like her life often was, and you realise this was a different kind of forbidden love, not loud or lascivious, but hidden under layers of corsets, diplomacy and restraint. A love that may have been imagined or real. But either way, it gave her something the crown never did, a sense of being understood. The diamonds glitter too brightly tonight, cut to perfection, worn with practised elegance, but humming with danger just beneath the sparkle. You're in pre-revolutionary France now, where the air smells like expensive perfume, powdered wigs and something faintly rotting. The court of Versailles is at its most opulent and most doomed, and at the centre of its most infamous scandal sits a queen whose image will never quite recover, Marie Antoinette. But this isn't the usual story of cake and guillotines. This is the tale of a necklace, one she never asked for, never wore and never accepted, that still managed to drag her reputation into the dirt and grease of public spectacle. It's called the Affair of the Diamond Necklace, and despite sounding like a soap opera subplot, it's a true story involving forgery, blackmail, cross-dressing, courtroom drama, and the slow unravelling of monarchy at the hands of scandal. Oh, and did we mention Marie Antoinette was totally innocent? It begins in the 1780s, with a piece of jewellery so ludicrously extravagant it should have come with its own mortgage. The necklace was originally commissioned by Louis XV for his mistress, Madame du Barry, a design dripping in nearly 650 diamonds and valued at what would be tens of millions today. But the king died before it was completed, and du Barry fell out of favour. The jewellers, stuck with their shimmering albatross, tried desperately to find a buyer. They pitched it to Marie Antoinette, who, despite her love of luxury, turned them down. She found the necklace gaudy and, more importantly, New France's economy was already buckling under the weight of war debt and peasant hunger. Enter Jeanne de la Motte, a con artist with a noble name and a talent for lies. She sees the necklace not as jewellery, but as opportunity. She seduces Cardinal de Rohan, a man desperate to get back into the Queen's good graces after past political missteps. Jeanne tells him she has a connection to Marie Antoinette, and that the Queen is secretly interested in the necklace after all, but wants to acquire it discreetly. Rohan, starstruck and gullible, agrees to help. He even sets up a secret meeting with the Queen in the gardens of Versailles, except the woman he meets is a prostitute who merely resembles Marie Antoinette. It's dark. She hands him a rose. He thinks he's just had a romantic exchange with royalty, and the trap is now fully sprung. With forged letters and mounting pressure, Jeanne convinces the cardinal to purchase the necklace on behalf of the Queen. The jewellers hand it over. Jeanne promptly disappears with it, breaking the diamonds apart, selling them off in London, and vanishing into scandalous legend. Eventually the deception unravels. Rohan is arrested. So is Jeanne. And although Marie Antoinette had no part in the scam, she's dragged through every headline, pamphlet and whispered conversation in France. To the angry public, she must have been involved. After all, hadn't she spent wildly, worn towering hairstyles, played dress-up in peasant costumes while real peasants starved? This was just another feather in her very controversial hat. Here's your historical fact. Though the court found Marie Antoinette innocent, public opinion turned sharply against her after the affair. It became one of the key events that fanned the flames of revolutionary anger, further associating the monarchy with decadence and dishonesty. And here's your fringe fact. One of the forgers involved in the scandal, Rétaux de Villette, allegedly learned his calligraphy skills by faking signatures in school, and later joined a travelling puppet troupe, which honestly is the career progression of every good historical villain. Now let's dive into the debate. Was this just an unfortunate case of royal optics gone wrong, or was it the inevitable result of a monarchy that had distanced itself from the people? Some historians argue that Marie Antoinette was the perfect scapegoat, young, foreign, fashionable and female. Others insist she bore some responsibility, not for the necklace, but for cultivating an image so indulgent that even obvious lies felt plausible to the masses. The tragedy of the diamond necklace affair isn't that it ruined Marie Antoinette's reputation, it's that it confirmed what many already wanted to believe. In an age before Twitter, gossip moved fast through pamphlets and propaganda. The idea of the Austrian whore, a queen who would secretly bankrupt the nation for sparkle, was more satisfying than the truth. And so, the myth stuck. Marie Antoinette spent the rest of her reign haunted by it. No matter what she did, charity work, quieter fashion, even having more children, she could never escape the public image shaped by a scam she had nothing to do with. And when the revolution finally came for her, that necklace clinked in the background like a ghost. So when you visit Versailles now, walking through the Hall of Mirrors and imagining the Queen at the height of her power, remember that somewhere there was a woman selling herself in a garden, pretending to be her. And somewhere else, a diamond necklace was being pulled apart piece by piece, just like Marie Antoinette's image, her legacy, and eventually her life. Sometimes forbidden affairs aren't romantic at all. Sometimes they're schemes dressed up like love, built from desire and lies, and they still end with a crown rolling down the stairs. You're deep in the palace now, not of marble, but of stone and sun-washed courtyards, where the scent of incense and old paper lingers in the halls. It's not Versailles or Windsor or Schönbrunn, it's Addis Ababa, the capital of an empire that once called itself the Land of Kings, stretching across mountain peaks and plateaus. The year is somewhere in the mid-20th century, but in this palace, time moves, strangely. Tonight you're peering behind the curtains of Ethiopia's imperial court into the life of a man who wore many titles: Rastafari, Regent, Emperor. But history knows him best as Haile Selassie, and what history doesn't always tell you is that this Lion of Judah kept more than royal secrets behind those palace doors. On the world stage, Selassie was regal, cerebral, and unshakably composed. Crowned emperor in 1930, he was seen as a modernizer, bringing electricity, aviation, and constitutional reform to Ethiopia while carefully navigating between tradition and progress. He was also, famously, a symbol of anti-colonial resistance. When Mussolini invaded Ethiopia in 1935, Selassie fled into exile but brought his case before the League of Nations, delivering one of the most iconic speeches of the 20th century. His words echoed through history. "It is us today. It will be you tomorrow." But while the world was hearing from the philosopher king, those inside the palace knew a different side. Selassie was deeply private, and his personal relationships were guarded like imperial treasures. He was married to Empress Menenasfor, a dignified and devoted partner, and together they had 6 children. Yet behind the polished facade of royal unity, there were murmurs, persistent, undeniable murmurs, of affairs with women from all corners of the court. Some of these relationships were open secrets. Among them was one woman known only in the court diaries as the Tigrian Rose, a nickname for a noblewoman from northern Ethiopia who, while never officially acknowledged, was frequently spotted travelling with the emperor's entourage. She was never photographed beside him, never mentioned in official statements, but she appeared in every city he visited, always trailing by just enough distance to be invisible to the press and unforgettable to those who paid attention. The Tigrian Rose wasn't a mistress in the European sense. She was a spiritual confidant, a political whisperer, and, according to legend, the woman who first encouraged Selassie to read Marcus Garvey's speeches, words that would later form the backbone of the Rastafarian movement that idolised him. If true, it's poetic irony, a hidden affair that helped birth a global faith. But that wasn't the only secret. Another of Selassie's companions was said to be a French Ethiopian translator, a woman named Almaz who worked in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and was often seen carrying files into the emperor's study long after normal working hours. Some believe she helped edit the emperor's memoirs. Others suggest she helped soften his more absolutist tendencies with gentle criticism, a rare luxury in a court where dissent could be fatal. While the empress remained the face of the monarchy, Almaz became its hidden conscience. Yet Selassie's liaisons were not always wrapped in grace. One lesser-known but deeply controversial chapter involves a scandal with a young palace maid who was rumoured to have given birth to a child with striking resemblance to the emperor. The story never made international headlines, but it circulated in Addis like wildfire. The maid disappeared. The child's fate remains unknown, and while the imperial court denied everything, some claim Selassie quietly arranged for the boy to be educated in Europe under a false name. Here's your historical fact. Haile Selassie ruled Ethiopia from 1930 to 1974, surviving World War II, exile and multiple coups. He was overthrown during a Marxist revolution, and likely killed in 1975, though the details were hidden for decades. His body was secretly buried beneath his office floor. And your fringe fact. When Selassie visited Jamaica in 1966, thousands of Rastafarians gathered at the airport to welcome him as a living god. He was so overwhelmed by the crowd and the dense cloud of ganja smoke that he initially refused to exit the plane. It took hours and the persuasion of government officials before he emerged, greeted with tears, shouting and trembling hands. Now the debate. Was Selassie a disciplined monarch who merely tolerated a few discreet affairs, or was he a man whose personal indulgences contradicted his moral authority? His admirers point to his global dignity and spiritual leadership. Critics argue that, like many emperors before him, he used his power to shield romantic exploits from accountability. And what about the women? Were they partners, victims, collaborators, or all three? The truth is, Haile Selassie was a man who lived in contradictions, a champion of human rights who imprisoned critics, a god to millions who lived like a recluse, a husband who remained married until his wife's death, yet may have shared his heart, and possibly more, with women history refuses to name. You walk through his old palace now, turned into a museum. You see photographs of state visits, handwritten letters, the throne room untouched. But nothing shows the roses he received in secret, the laughter that never echoed outside the palace walls, or the deep, tangled roots of affection he buried beneath imperial marble. In the end, Selassie ruled with his mind, but may have loved with a heart too guarded to admit it. The air tastes like salt and champagne now, light as a Monaco breeze, but with the weight of old Hollywood gossip clinging to every syllable. You're standing on the stone steps of the Prince's Palace in Monte Carlo, but it doesn't feel like a fairy tale. It feels like a tabloid with a couture budget. Because tonight's affair isn't whispered through drafty halls or scratched into fading letters. No, this one played out under 1,000 camera flashes, with perfect cheekbones and perfectly choreographed tragedy. This is the story of Grace Kelly and Prince Rainier III. The golden girl of American cinema meets the stoic prince of a tiny European principality. A match made in headline heaven, or maybe just a well-dressed, Cold War of the heart. Let's rewind to 1955. Grace Kelly is at the peak of her career. She's an Oscar winner, an Alfred Hitchcock muse, and a living embodiment of American elegance. Her face is everywhere, but her personal life remains a mystery, cool, composed, and untouchably luminous. When she attends the Cannes Film Festival that year, she's invited to meet Prince Rainier, the ruler of Monaco, a nation the size of a decent neighbourhood, but with all the pomp and pressure of an empire. It's supposed to be a polite photo op. What it becomes is history. They exchange letters, long, poetic, surprisingly intense letters. Within a few months, he proposes. She accepts. And just like that, Grace Kelly announces her retirement from acting. Hollywood gasps. Monaco prepares for the wedding of the century. When she sails across the Atlantic in 1956 with her trousseau and a bridal party larger than some armies, the cameras don't stop rolling for a second. Over 30 million people watch the ceremony live, and just like that, America's sweetheart becomes Her Serene Highness. But here's the thing, fairy tales look better from the outside. Almost immediately, Grace discovers her new life is not a romantic dream, but a royal protocol machine. She's expected to follow rigid schedules, attend endless functions, and represent Monaco with zero margin for error. The palace is austere, the staff unyielding. And Rainier? Well, he's not the suave European charmer the public thinks. He's moody, controlling, deeply insecure about his tiny kingdom's international stature, and not especially fond of his wife's global fame outshining his own. Grace, used to scripts and sets and lighting she could control, finds herself playing a role she can't rewrite. Her requests to return to acting, at first timid, later desperate, are denied. She misses the stage, the freedom, the glamour she once ruled so easily. Rainier's refusal isn't just personal, it's political. Monaco's reputation depends on the image of the fairy tale couple. If the princess leaves to do movies, the illusion crumbles, so she stays. And soon, the rumours begin. Not just about her, though whispers swirl about brief flirtations with European aristocrats, including a possible friendship-turned-romantic with actor David Niven, who visited the palace more than once. But also about Rainier. Long before they wed, he'd enjoyed the attention of numerous actresses and socialites. Some suggest those relationships never fully stopped. Others claim Grace was simply too independent, too emotionally complex for the rigid world she married into. Here's your historical fact. After her marriage, Grace Kelly never acted again, despite numerous offers, including a personal plea from Alfred Hitchcock to star in Marnie. Rainier said no. The role went to Tippi Hedren. And your fringe fact. Grace had a secret second wedding dress, a less formal gown made for a private blessing ceremony. Almost no photographs of it exist, but palace insiders claim it was her favourite of the two. Now the debate. Was Grace Kelly truly in love with Rainier, or did she marry for duty, spectacle, or escape? Some believe she saw the marriage as a form of liberation from studios, contracts, and the male gaze of Hollywood. Others suggest she hoped for a softer life, one less dictated by scripts but still full of beauty. And yet, many biographers now argue she quickly realised her mistake and spent years in a quiet state of gilded discontent, privately mourning the career and identity she had to abandon. The tragedy, of course, doesn't end with court dinners and polite silences. In 1982, Grace dies in a car accident on a winding mountain road above Monte Carlo. She suffers a stroke while driving and veers off the cliff. Her daughter, Stephanie, survives, but is severely injured. The world is shocked. Her funeral draws royalty, celebrities, and fans from every corner of the globe. Rainier stands beside her coffin, visibly broken. He never remarries. So now you're standing on a marble balcony overlooking the sea, where the sunlight glints off the water and the bells from St. Nicholas Cathedral still chime every morning. Somewhere below, the streets of Monte Carlo hum with luxury and speed. But here, in the quiet corners of the palace, the silence lingers. The kind of silence that follows a love story everyone saw, but few ever truly understood. Grace Kelly gave up everything for a role that never let her speak in her own voice. Maybe that's the real scandal. Not a secret lover, not a fiery affair, but the way she disappeared so elegantly, so gracefully into a world that couldn't love her back. The air is tighter now, more clipped and pressurized, like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm that never quite breaks. You're in late 20th century Britain, still royally proper, still steeped in centuries of tradition, but now interrupted by helicopters, headlines and flashbulbs that pop like tiny lightning strikes. This isn't the court of kings and queens behind heavy velvet curtains. This is a monarchy trying to survive celebrity culture, and losing ground by the minute. At the centre of it all, a prince, a princess, and a third person who never quite left the room. Prince Charles, Diana Spencer, and always, always, Camilla Parker Bowles. When Charles and Diana married in 1981, it was televised mythology. A global audience of 750 million watched the wedding unfold like some new kind of coronation. Diana was just 20 years old, sweet and nervous in an ivory gown with a train long enough to trip a continent. Charles was 12 years older, composed, and not in love. That's not a post-scandal revision. That's how it started. Charles had already been involved with Camilla for years, before, during, and, crucially, after his marriage to Diana. The royal family didn't approve of Camilla as a bride back in the 1970s. She wasn't virginal enough, not aristocratic enough, already married, too experienced. So instead, Charles was nudged, gently but firmly, toward Diana, the naive, beautiful, aristocratic teenager with zero skeletons in her closet. Or so they thought. But even as the world celebrated the fairy tale, the cracks showed early. Diana sensed from the start that she wasn't alone in the relationship. She once described her early days at court as the saddest a girl could ever imagine. Camilla was always nearby, always part of Charles's world, at parties, on hunting trips, even slipping into royal phone calls like a ghost with a well-poured gin and tonic. And then, of course, came the tapes. In 1992, the infamous Camilla-gate tapes were leaked. A recorded phone call between Charles and Camilla, full of endearments, awkward flirtation, and that now immortal line where Charles jokes about wanting to be her tampon. Yes, that happened. Yes, it became public. Yes, Britain collectively screamed into a pillow. The scandal was seismic. Charles and Diana were already separated by then, and this only confirmed what most already suspected, that his heart had never truly left Camilla. Diana responded not with silence, but with steel. In 1995, she gave an interview that stopped time. When asked if Camilla was part of the failure of the marriage, she famously said, "There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded." Calm, precise, devastating. Here's your historical fact. Charles and Diana officially divorced in 1996, 4 years after their separation, and just 1 year before Diana's untimely death in a car crash in Paris. Charles married Camilla in 2005 in a civil ceremony, and she now holds the title of Queen Consort. Your fringe fact. Camilla's code name with palace security was Fred, while Charles was Unicorn. Why? No idea. But it's hard not to picture Camilla in pearls ducking behind a hedge as someone yells, "Fred is on the move!" Now for the debate, one that still rages in whispers and comment threads alike. Was Charles truly a villain, or just a man trapped between duty and desire? Was Camilla the manipulative other woman, or was she the one person who ever really got him? And what about Diana? Was she a martyr to monarchy, or a woman who simply refused to play the role she was assigned. It's tempting to side with the fairy tale. After all, Diana became a global icon of grace and resilience, but life is messier than royal narratives. Charles and Camilla's affair wasn't born from lust or convenience. It was a long, tangled devotion. They'd known each other since the early 1970s, shared books, music, dry humour. Camilla wasn't glamorous. She wasn't especially fashionable. But she understood Charles, and in a world where every smile is staged and every hug is broadcast, that's worth more than rubies. Still, the damage was real. Diana's pain, broadcast to the world, reshaped public opinion about the monarchy. For years, Camilla was despised, hissed at in public, and blamed for everything from Charles's coldness to Diana's death. Rehabilitation came slowly, if at all. It wasn't until Queen Elizabeth II gave her quiet blessing that Camilla was fully folded into the royal narrative, not as a scandal, but as a solution. But even now, as you walk through Kensington Gardens or past the gates of Clarence House, you feel it. That awkward, lingering tension. The sense that the fairy tale cracked, and no one knew how to tape it back together. Love, when forbidden, can sometimes be thrilling. But when it's technically allowed, yet publicly reviled, it becomes a different kind of torment. So here they are, Charles and Camilla, finally together, older, quieter, still carrying the weight of everything that came before. Their love story outlasted divorce, humiliation, and tragedy. But at what cost? Sometimes forbidden love isn't about sneaking around in the shadows. Sometimes it's about living in the full blaze of daylight and having the entire world glare back at you. The night is thick with flashbulbs again, but this time they're sharper, colder, like paparazzi bulbs spitting fire at every blink. You're in Paris now, or maybe London, or maybe trapped somewhere in between, like a dream where everything feels familiar and doomed. It's the late 1990s, and the fairy tale has truly shattered. Tonight, you're walking into the final chapter of one of the most iconic royal stories ever told. A story that had stopped pretending to be a romance long ago. You're walking with Princess Diana, no longer a royal, but still every bit a queen to the people, and beside her is a new figure in the spotlight. Dodi Fayed, heir to a billionaire empire and, for a brief, blazing moment, the man who held her hand as the world watched. After her divorce from Prince Charles in 1996, Diana was free on paper, but freedom in her case came with a price. She lost her HRH title, her royal protection, and any illusion of ever slipping quietly into anonymity. She was a global icon of vulnerability, resilience, and impossible glamour, yet also the loneliest woman in most rooms she entered. The press followed her everywhere. Her every move was a headline, every outfit a news cycle, every man she stood next to a potential lover. Enter Emad Dodi Fayed, the son of Mohammed Al-Fayed, owner of Harrods, the Ritz Hotel, and more tabloid pages than most celebrities could dream of. Dodi was known as a playboy, charming, soft-spoken, always surrounded by models and Maybachs. But when he and Diana began dating in the summer of 1997, the press lost its collective mind. They vacationed on his yacht in the Mediterranean. Photos were snapped of them kissing, lounging, laughing. For Diana, it felt, for a moment, like control. A life she chose, a man she picked. The relationship escalated quickly. There were rumours of an engagement. Some said Dodi had already bought a ring. Others suggested Diana was using him to get back at Charles, or to signal to the royals that she was in every way truly out of their grasp. Whatever the motive, they seemed inseparable, and the paparazzi followed in swarms. But here's where the story turns. On August 31st, 1997, after dining at the Ritz in Paris, Diana and Dodi attempted to evade the paparazzi by taking a back exit. Their driver, Henry Paul, who was later found to be under the influence, sped off through the Pont de l'Alma tunnel with Diana and Dodi in the back seat, and bodyguard Trevor Rees-Jones in the front. The car crashed. Dodi died instantly. Diana died hours later in the hospital. The world stopped. The grief was global, surreal, and unbearable, and the questions never ended. Here's your historical fact. Diana's funeral, watched by an estimated 2.5 billion people, became one of the most watched events in television history. Her brother's eulogy, her son's solemn walk behind the coffin, and Elton John's reworked candle in the wind, marked a cultural moment so immense it rewired how the public related to the monarchy. And your fringe fact. Before Dodi, Diana had reportedly been in a discreet relationship with Hasnat Khan, a Pakistani heart surgeon. She called him her Mr. Wonderful, and once visited his family in Lahore, disguised in a traditional shawl. Friends claimed she was more emotionally invested in Hasnat than Dodi, and that her summer with the Fayeds might have been, in part, an attempt to move on, or to provoke a reaction. Now the inevitable debate. Was Diana truly in love with Dodi Fayed, or was it a whirlwind of distraction, rebellion and spectacle? Some say they were mismatched, a glamorous fling more than a soulmate connection. Others argue that Dodi represented the freedom and safety Diana had been denied for so long, that for once she didn't have to answer to courtiers or protocols, that, in him, she found a kind of easy, unfiltered companionship. But then there's the darker side. Conspiracy theories blossomed like mould. Was the crash orchestrated? Was the royal family involved? Why was Diana's security downgraded? Why were they driving so recklessly? Books were written, investigations launched. None fully settled the public's suspicion. It's possible nothing ever will. What we do know is this. Diana died not as a royal, but as a woman in love, or at least reaching for it, in a world that never let her rest. Her affair with Dodi wasn't about power or diplomacy. It was about being seen, held, escaping the life she'd been forced into since she was 19. It wasn't a long-term love story. It didn't get the time to become one, but it mattered. Today, there's a modest plaque in the Pont de l'Alma tunnel. People leave flowers, tourists take selfies, locals still look away, unsure whether to treat it like sacred ground or just another tragic stop on a city map. And somewhere, Diana and Dodi's final drive plays on a loop in 1,000 documentaries. This wasn't the story the monarchy wanted. It wasn't the story she wanted. But it's the one we remember. A princess and a lover. Flashbulbs and car horns. A heartbeat fading in the back seat while the world pressed its face to the glass. Not all forbidden affairs are long or deeply intellectual. Some are just two people trying to outrun the past, until the past catches up at 100 miles an hour. You're walking through the gilded ruins of a family that once owned half of Europe and married into the rest. There are crests on the ceilings, saints in the corners, and enough oil portraits to line a football field. Welcome to the House of Habsburg, the dynasty that famously married instead of fought, stitched kingdoms together with vows, and passed down power like it was a particularly cursed heirloom. And cursed. Oh, absolutely. Especially when it came to love. Because for all their power, the Habsburgs were absolute disasters when it came to romance. Affairs, obsessions, arranged marriages with emotional decapitations. This family couldn't light a candle without setting their personal lives on fire. And if you believe the whispers of history, it wasn't just misfortune. It was something darker, a pattern, a streak of tragic, tangled love stories so relentless, people began to call it the Habsburg love curse. Let's start with the poster child for royal heartbreak, Empress Elisabeth of Austria. Yes, our friend Sisi from earlier. Married to Emperor Franz Joseph at 16, she spent her entire adult life dodging protocol and love like they were poisoned arrows. But it didn't stop there. Her son, Crown Prince Rudolf, inherited the family's crown and its curse. Rudolf was brilliant, idealistic, and suffocated by the empire's rigid expectations. He married Princess Stephanie of Belgium in a match that was politically perfect and personally disastrous. Bored and bitter, he fell into a spiral of affairs, including a notorious one with a 17-year-old baroness named Mary Vetsera. Their love affair, deeply forbidden and utterly unstable, ended in a murder-suicide pact at Mayerling in 1889. Rudolf shot Mary, then turned the gun on himself. The Habsburgs called it a hunting accident. The world called it what it was, madness in silk gloves. The curse didn't stop with them. Fast forward to Archduke Franz Ferdinand, whose love story could have been a Hallmark movie if it weren't for the body count. He fell in love with Countess Sophie Chotek, a woman not deemed royal enough by Habsburg standards. After years of pushback, they married, on the condition that Sophie would never share his rank or pass any titles to their children. They were in love, genuinely so, but the family made sure it hurt. In 1914, while visiting Sarajevo, They were assassinated together. The shots that killed them triggered World War I, tore empires apart and cost millions of lives. The love story that defied the Habsburgs, it destroyed them. Here's your historical fact. The House of Habsburg ruled over much of Europe for nearly 600 years, producing emperors for the Holy Roman Empire, kings of Spain, and monarchs across Hungary, Austria, and Bohemia. Their power only began to unravel after the First World War, and not coincidentally, after generations of marriage-driven misery. And your fringe fact. The Habsburgs were so obsessed with maintaining their royal bloodline that they routinely married close relatives. The result? A distinct physical trait known as the Habsburg jaw, a prominent, often disfiguring chin and jawline. Some Habsburgs had difficulty speaking or even eating because of it. If the love curse didn't get you, the inbreeding might. Now for the debate. Was there really a curse? Or was it simply the byproduct of centuries of political marriages, emotional repression, and generational trauma? Scholars point out that the family used romance as a weapon, marrying daughters off like chess pieces, forbidding love matches, and prioritizing bloodlines over basic sanity. The emotional cost, sky high. Over time, it created a pressure cooker of suppressed desires, unfulfilled partnerships, and secret affairs. You don't need black magic for that to explode. Just a few centuries of strategic misery. And yet, not all Habsburg love stories ended in funerals and footnotes. Occasionally there were glimpses of tenderness. Emperor Charles I and Empress Zita were famously devoted, exchanging romantic letters even while fleeing exile and war. But even they weren't spared. Charles died young, Zita spent decades in mourning, and their descendants live scattered, carrying titles with no countries to rule. So here you are, walking through the echoing corridors of a palace-turned-museum. You pass the portraits, marble-skinned royals in heavy collars, eyes full of secrets and regrets. You see wedding gowns preserved behind glass, worn by brides who had no idea what they were signing up for, and you feel it. The weight of a dynasty that believed love should serve power, only to be consumed by both. The Habsburg love curse isn't about witches or whispers. It's about the price of turning love into policy. It's about what happens when you treat hearts like treaties. And it's about how, in the end, even the most powerful families can't outrun the consequences of cold marriages and forbidden passions. Because when you cage love for too long, it doesn't just die. Sometimes it explodes. You're in the Ottoman Empire now, somewhere between silk and smoke, between golden crescents and sharp whispers in tiled corridors. This palace isn't all chandeliers and powder rooms. It's shadowed by lattice screens, cushioned silence, and the sound of soft slippers on marble. You've entered the imperial harem, a world misunderstood by outsiders as mere indulgence, but which, in truth, operated as a political engine wrapped in velvet. Tonight, you meet the woman who broke every rule, changed the line of succession, and turned a forbidden affair into the most dangerous love story in the empire's history. Her name was Roxolana, also known as Hürrem Sultan, and she seduced a sultan, outmaneuvered a court, and rewrote the fate of an empire from behind a curtain. It starts around 1520. Suleiman the Magnificent has just ascended to the throne. He's young, ambitious, and still somewhat untested. As custom dictates, he inherits a harem of concubines, young women collected from across the empire, trained in language, music, politics, and of course how to please a ruler. One of those women is Alexandra Lisovska, a Ruthenian girl taken during a Tatar raid and sold into slavery. She arrives at Topkapi Palace with nothing, no name, no freedom, no future, except she's clever and beautiful and absolutely unwilling to be forgotten. She catches Suleiman's eye quickly, earning the nickname Hürrem, meaning the joyful one. But unlike the other women in the harem, she doesn't just want his attention. She wants permanence. She refuses to play the long game of occasional visits and fading relevance. She charms him, debates him, writes poetry. She makes him laugh, something few sultans were allowed to do in public, let alone in bed. And Suleiman? He falls. Hard. Here's the problem. In the Ottoman system, concubines were never to be married. Marriage created loyalties that threatened the stability of the dynasty. A sultan could father children, yes, but he could not love in the traditional sense. Emotions weren't just messy, they were dangerous. But Suleiman didn't care. Not only did he keep Hürrem by his side for years, breaking the custom of rotating concubines, but in a shocking, unheard-of move, he married her. Legally. Publicly. The empire gasped. She was given titles, influence, and eventually her own private palace. She bore him multiple children and slowly began shifting the centre of power from the outer court to the harem. For a woman who'd arrived in chains, it was a transformation that shook the entire Islamic world, and with power came enemies. Hürrem faced brutal resistance from the viziers, the janissaries, even members of the royal family. She was accused of witchcraft, manipulation, poisoning rivals, especially after the suspicious death of Suleiman's firstborn son, Mustafa, who had been favoured for succession. Many believed Hürrem orchestrated his downfall to clear the path for her own son, Selim. Was it true? Maybe, maybe not. But the rumour stuck. What's undeniable is that she was the first woman to shatter the boundaries of harem life. She wrote letters to foreign leaders, brokered charity projects, founded schools and mosques under her own name, and built a diplomatic network as complex as any vizier's. She transformed the harem from a holding pen into a political headquarters. After her, the role of Walid Sultan, the Sultan's mother, became one of the most powerful positions in the empire. Here's your historical fact. Hürrem Sultan died in 1558, long before her son ascended the throne, but her legacy reshaped the empire. For the next century, during a period often called the Sultanate of Women, mothers and wives of sultans would wield enormous power behind the scenes. Now for your fringe fact. Hürrem and Suleiman reportedly exchanged love poems in Persian, Arabic, and Turkish. One of Suleiman's most famous verses described her as "my joy, my beloved, my confidant, my rose without thorns." That's not harem protocol, that's handwritten obsession. And here's the debate. Was Hürrem Sultan a manipulative seductress who engineered deaths and rewrote succession for selfish ends? Or was she a brilliant strategist navigating a male-dominated world the only way she could, through love, proximity, and an unmatched intellect? Historians are still split. Western sources long painted her as a scheming femme fatale, while modern scholarship offers a more nuanced view, one of survival, agency, and ambition, in a world where women were expected to be seen, but not heard. One thing's clear, she changed everything. After her, no woman in the harem could be seen as powerless. She didn't just have an affair, she established a new political model. She didn't just love Suleiman, she became his partner in a rule, in both bed and battle. As you pass through the tiled chambers of Topkapi Palace, the air feels charged, not with incense but with defiance. You're not walking through a story of seduction. You're walking through a revolution disguised as a romance. A woman who began life in captivity climbed through shadows and changed history without ever drawing a sword. Not all forbidden love is quiet. Some of it whispers through centuries like a war chant wrapped in silk. Now you step into the swirling heat of 1940s Cairo, where chandeliers glitter above scandal and palace walls echo with Italian arias and Egyptian intrigue. This isn't the chill of a European court or the mysticism of the Ottoman harem. This is the royal drama of a modern kingdom balancing on the edge of collapse. And at the heart of it all is King Farouk I, Egypt's last reigning monarch. He was young, wealthy, and completely unprepared for power, but he knew how to fall in love, often, loudly, and most dangerously with a woman the palace would never accept. An Italian countess who appeared one day like a cigarette had come to life and turned Egypt's high society upside down. Let's start with Farouk himself. He became king at 16 after his father, King Fayed III, died in 1936. Overnight, Farouk became the face of Egyptian royalty, tall, handsome, and impeccably dressed, with more cars than he had roads to drive them on. But beneath the tailored suits and princely charm was a man spiralling fast. He gambled, hoarded, and indulged in late-night binges that included entire roast lambs and trays of eclairs. He once claimed to own the world's largest collection of pornography, including items he reportedly stole from European palaces during wartime. Yes, he looted Versailles for smut. You really can't make this up. But Farouk's greatest obsession wasn't cars or food or stamp collections. It was women. And none captured his imagination like Countess Irma Capece Minutolo, a glamorous opera singer of Italian descent who came into his life after he'd already been exiled from the throne. Their love story wasn't a courtship, it was a collision. By the early 1950s, Farouk had been forced out of power. The Free Officers movement, led by Gamal Abdel Nasser, had overthrown the monarchy, and Farouk fled to Italy aboard his royal yacht. He left behind a nation crumbling with poverty and revolution, but brought with him a substantial portion of the royal treasury, and soon after, Irma. She was everything he wasn't: poised, cultured, musically trained. Where he had bombast, she had elegance. Where he had tantrums, she had poise. Irma wasn't some decorative fling. She held her own in any room, and it wasn't long before people began calling her the unofficial queen in exile. The pair became inseparable. They were photographed on the Riviera, dining in Roman cafes draped in silk and scandal. Even when he ballooned in weight and retreated further from public life, she stayed close. But here's where the plot thickens. Farouk was still technically married, at least by Islamic law. And Irma, a devout Catholic, refused to enter into a civil marriage that wouldn't be recognised by the church. Some sources claim they had a secret religious ceremony, others say they simply lived together, defying convention but never formalising anything. The Vatican never blessed the union. The Egyptian royal family refused to acknowledge it, but Irma never left. And after Farouk's sudden death in 1965, he collapsed in a Roman restaurant after a particularly indulgent meal of oysters, lamb and chocolate mousse. Irma began telling the world she had been his true wife, his final love, his intended queen. Here's your historical fact. Farouk's exile marked the end of the Muhammad Ali dynasty's 150-year rule in Egypt. After his departure, Egypt was declared a republic, and the lavish palaces he once roamed were either converted into museums or demolished. And your fringe fact: Farouk had such an obsession with redheads that he supposedly ordered his staff to track the movements of every prominent redhead woman in Rome. His staff reportedly carried index cards with names, addresses and coffee orders. Irma, notably, was not a redhead. Just one more way she broke the mould. Now the debate. Was Irma Capeche Minutolo a calculating social climber who saw in Farouk a title she could never claim in Italy? Or was she genuinely devoted to a man most of the world had stopped taking seriously? Her defenders say she stayed long after the palaces were gone and the photographers had moved on. Her critics point out that she published memoirs and clung to the Queen of Egypt image for decades. What's clearer is this: Farouk found something in Irma that felt like redemption. She didn't try to fix him, just stayed while the world watched him burn out. And maybe that's the deepest intimacy of all, to love someone not in their power, but in their collapse. Today, you can find Farouk's belongings scattered across Europe. His monogrammed linens pop up at antique fairs, his royal seals lie dusty in forgotten boxes. But Irma, she remains one of the last living links to a dynasty that once saw itself as eternal. A woman who walked beside a king, not at his coronation but in his exile, not in triumph but in disgrace. And sometimes that's when love matters most. Now you drift across shifting sands and mirrored skyscrapers into the gilded stillness of modern Middle Eastern royalty, where the thrones are newer, but the shadows behind them are ancient. This isn't a world of palaces wrapped in ivy or castles with creaky floors. These are jet-age dynasties where falcons fly in first class, and power moves quietly, behind tinted windows and billion-dollar contracts. But even in this slick new era, where monarchs rule with oil and opulence, the oldest story still finds its way in: desire that defies the script. Tonight's affairs aren't immortalised in tapestries or oil paintings. They live in leaked WhatsApp messages, grainy paparazzi footage, and whispered flights from private terminals. You're in the realm of modern royal scandals in the Middle East, where love is still dangerous, sometimes even fatal, and forbidden romances can threaten billion-dollar kingdoms. One of the most notorious examples: the mysterious case of Princess Haile bint Hussein and the ruler of Dubai, Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, a tale that feels like a thriller if the stakes weren't so heartbreakingly real. Haile was no stranger to royalty. The daughter of King Hussein of Jordan and the half-sister of King Abdullah II, she was educated at Oxford, fluent in multiple languages, and an accomplished equestrian who once competed at the Olympics. When she married Sheikh Mohammed in 2004, She became the second official wife among his many consorts, a diplomatic union more than a traditional love match, but one that seemed stable, even affectionate for years, until it wasn't. By 2019, Haile had fled Dubai with her 2 children, seeking refuge in London. The headlines broke like a sandstorm across 2 continents. Reports suggested she feared for her life, that she discovered unsettling information about the fate of Princess Latifa, one of Sheikh Mohammed's daughters who had previously tried to escape Dubai in 2018 and was forcibly returned by security forces in a dramatic sea raid. Haile's flight became more than a marital dispute. It became a human rights scandal. But there was something more behind the escape, a detail that added a forbidden twist to an already explosive narrative. It was alleged that Haile had developed a relationship with one of her British bodyguards, a former soldier assigned to her security detail. The rumour was that Sheikh Mohammed discovered their connection, possibly through intercepted communications, and became enraged. The surveillance, the threats, the fear, it all escalated from there. Eventually the matter ended up in the UK High Court. The ruling: Sheikh Mohammed had orchestrated abductions of 2 of his daughters, Princess Latifa and Princess Shamsa, and subjected Haile to a campaign of harassment and intimidation. It was a legal bombshell, and behind it all still was that unconfirmed but persistent whisper that this wasn't just about power. It was about a woman who dared to love, or be loved, by someone not written into her royal contract. Here's your historical fact. The UAE's royal family, like many modern Gulf monarchies, operates under a system that blends absolute monarchy with Islamic law, and family affairs are rarely, never, subject to public scrutiny. Haile's case was a rare legal and public rebuke of a sitting ruler by another royal. And your fringe fact: during her time in exile, Haile reportedly stayed at an £85 million estate near Kensington Palace and fought Sheikh Mohammed in a legal battle estimated to have cost over £250 million, the most expensive family court case in British history. Now, zoom out. Haile's story is just one of several. In recent years, whispers have emerged from multiple Middle Eastern monarchies, of runaway princesses, of affairs cut short by surveillance states, of texts exchanged under encryption that could lead to prison, or worse. Take Princess Latifa, for example. The daughter of Sheikh Mohammed, she attempted to escape the UAE aboard a yacht, citing years of abuse and surveillance. Captured off the coast of India by commandos, she was returned to Dubai, and later appeared in staged photos with diplomats to quell the backlash. Whether she was truly free remained a matter of global concern for years. Or Princess Basma bint Saud of Saudi Arabia, who publicly advocated for women's rights and was later detained without charge for over a year. She claimed she was imprisoned for attempting to travel abroad for medical treatment. Her real crime? Possibly speaking too freely, or possibly loving too freely. The lines are hard to draw when romance and rebellion blur. The debate here isn't whether these affairs were real or imagined. It's about why they matter so much in modern monarchies. When love becomes an act of defiance, when choosing your own partner means choosing exile or even risking your life, then romance becomes political. It becomes a protest. A royal woman escaping her gilded cage isn't just a tabloid headline, it's a crack in the wall. So now picture this: a woman in an abaya, boarding a private jet with her children in the dead of night. Her phone is wiped clean. Her guards are paid in cash. She doesn't look back. She knows she'll be accused, shamed, maybe hunted. But in that moment, she is free. And what is that, if not love? Maybe not the kind you see in sweeping ballrooms or candlelit palaces, but love as survival. Love as flight. Love that doesn't ask permission. You won't find oil paintings of these women. There are no marble statues, but their stories are written in court transcripts and international headlines, encrypted messages and frozen bank accounts. This is the new face of royal scandal, no less forbidden, no less heartbreaking, and no less dangerous. The curtains are closing now, not on one romance, but on dozens, across centuries, continents, and coronations. You've stood in candlelit ballrooms and bulletproof palaces, wandered the velvet corridors of Versailles, the marble halls of Schönbrunn, the mirrored streets of Monaco, and even the sun-blasted compounds of modern royalty. You've seen love that reshaped empires, lust that sparked wars, and whispers that still echo through stained glass and scandal sheets. But before we let the lights dim for good, there's one final story to tell. Not a single affair, but the collective when love undoes an empire. It begins in pattern. From Cleopatra to Camilla, you've seen how royal love was never just about two people. It was about image, bloodlines, alliances, and, more than anything, control. Forbidden affairs weren't forbidden because of morality. They were forbidden because they threatened the fragile balance between personal desire and political stability. And when that balance tipped, it wasn't just reputations that fell, it was entire kingdoms. Let's step back to the Romanovs for a moment. Russia's last imperial family wasn't undone by war alone. It was also undone by Rasputin, the mystic drawn into the royal circle through Empress Alexandra's desperate love for her son and her dangerous trust in Rasputin's influence. The whispers of an affair between Rasputin and the Empress, whether real or fabricated, were enough to poison the public image of the throne. Even though Nicholas II was technically the Tsar, the people began to see the empire as ruled by a mad monk and a love-blind empress. The revolution didn't just come from breadlines, it came from scandal, dripping slowly into the public trust until it collapsed. Or go back further, to Edward VIII and Wallis Simpson. The British monarchy survived, yes, but it was never quite the same. The abdication exposed something raw and unfiltered, that even the highest crown could be surrendered for love, and that once the public sees behind the veil of divine right, it never forgets. The institution stumbled, adjusted, and limped forward, but Edward's choice rewrote the royal rulebook forever. Then look at Diana. Her love life wasn't just her own business. It became everyone's. The way she weaponized empathy, how she spoke about her heartbreak, turned the private pain of one woman into a cultural shift. It made monarchy human, and in some ways, that was the beginning of its slow unravelling. The golden glow cracked. The mystique drained out. What replaced it was real, but real is fragile. Diana's heart became the lens through which the world judged the House of Windsor. And even now, long after her death, that lens still distorts everything they do. And it's not just women who change things. Antony abandoned Rome for Cleopatra. David ordered a murder over Bathsheba. Henry VIII upended an entire church to marry Anne Boleyn. These weren't passive mistakes. These were tectonic shifts made in the name of passion, or obsession, and once the shift begins, there's no sealing the cracks. Love doesn't just break hearts in royal families, it breaks systems, because for royalty, love is not private, it never has been. The moment a royal falls in love, the court watches, the cabinet listens, the people start taking notes. A flirtation isn't just a flirtation, it's potential treason. A kiss is a treaty, a mistress is a threat. A child born out of wedlock? That's a dynastic crisis in a cradle. Here's your historical fact. In nearly every major monarchy that has fallen, from France to Russia to Egypt to Ethiopia, there's a paper trail of romantic scandal leading up to the collapse. Sometimes it's a mistress made too visible, sometimes it's a spouse scorned. But the story is always there, in the footnotes, quietly steering the ship toward the iceberg. And your final fringe fact. In 2023, more people Googled royal affairs than royal lineage. That says it all. We don't care who inherits the crown. We care who broke the rules to love someone they shouldn't have. Now for the final debate. Are forbidden royal affairs cautionary tales or just proof that even the most powerful people are still, at their core, human? Maybe both. Maybe that's the point. Maybe the reason we're drawn to these stories isn't because they're salacious, but because they're honest in a way monarchy rarely is. These are the moments when the crown slips, when the king becomes a man, when the queen becomes a woman, when history stops pretending. Because the truth is, you can rule a nation, but you can't rule your heart. So as the stories settle and the jeweled curtains fall, you realise what you've really been hearing all this time. Not just gossip or history, but confession. Every forbidden royal affair is a love letter scratched into the margins of power, a whispered "I love you," behind layers of etiquette and consequence. Some of those whispers grew into revolutions, some turned to ashes, but all of them left a mark, and maybe that's the most royal thing of all. So here we are, at the quiet edge of the palace garden, where the moonlight stretches soft across marble fountains, and the music has finally stopped playing. You've walked with queens and lovers, generals and concubines, whispered behind curtains and crept down hidden staircases. And now, it's time to step back out into the world, where love is a little less dangerous, but still just as complicated. What did we learn? That power doesn't shield you from longing, that crowns don't cancel out loneliness, that even when empires are built on law and order, it only takes one stolen glance or one love letter sealed with wax to send the whole machine wobbling. Some of these lovers survived, some didn't. Some were remembered in stained glass and bronze, others were quietly erased, their portraits painted over and names scratched from family trees. But they were real, and they mattered. And you were there for all of it. Every gasp, every dagger behind a smile, every moment where a heartbeat nearly rewrote history. You tiptoed through Versailles, rode beside Cleopatra's barge, held your breath in Diana's final drive. You saw how love can be a weapon, a refuge, a rebellion. And maybe, in your own way, you recognized pieces of yourself in the silences between them. So now go ahead, fluff your pillow, turn off that little lamp. Let the last echoes of these royal confessions settle in the space between your ears and the darkness behind your eyelids. Because though the palace doors have closed for now, the stories never really end. Not when love, no matter how forbidden, keeps finding its way back into the throne room,